Hello guys, welcome to Fiction Quest. So in this video, we will see, what if Naruto became the consort to a harem of vampire queens? If you enjoy these kinds of stories, don't forget to show us some love by hitting the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your support means the world to us. Now, let's start the story. Chapter 1. A Shadow's Bargain. The world dissolved into a symphony of pain and searing heat. One moment, Naruto was driving a Rasengan into the chest of a masked shinobi whose stolen Kekkei Genkai warped space itself. The next, the man's final spiteful jutsu had turned his own attack back on him. The spiraling chakra, his very life force, tore through his shoulder and side, a vortex of agony that shredded muscle and cracked bone. He hit the moss-slicked trunk of a giant cedar with a wet crunch, his vision tunneling into a pinprick of gray light. This is it, he thought, a strange calm settling over the screaming torment of his nerves. This is a bad way to go. He could feel Kurama's chakra, a furious, boiling ocean of red, trying to stitch him back together, but the damage was too catastrophic. The warped spatial energy, why from the enemy's jutsu lingered like a poison, unraveling the fox's healing before it could even begin. More, Kurama's voice roared in his mind, a sound of primal fury and desperation. You need more. All of it, now. Or we die here, Kit. There was no time for debate. Naruto relinquished control, opening the floodgates. It wasn't the controlled, symbiotic flow he used in his KCM modes. This was a raw, unfiltered deluge of demonic energy, a tidal wave of pure power with no purpose other than survival. The world didn't just turn red, it became red. The very air around him ignited with the pressure of it. His wounds sealed in a geyser of steam and raw energy, flesh and bone snapping back into place with brutal, agonizing speed. The sheer density of the chakra, a sun's worth of life force erupting in a dying forest. Pushed against the fabric of reality. The enemy's lingering spatial jutsu, that venomous tear in the world, reacted to the impossible energy density. It latched onto the power source, not to attack it, but to anchor to it. A low hum vibrated through Naruto's skull, and the world began to stretch, like ink bleeding into wet paper. The giant cedars warped and twisted into grotesque spirals. The gray sky cracked, not like glass, but like fabric, revealing a starless, obsidian void beneath. He felt a lurch, not of movement, but of place. It was the sickening sensation of the entire universe shifting around him while he remained motionless. He was an anchor point in a storm of collapsing reality. His body, supercharged with Kurama's raw power, was pulled taut, then snapped through the tear. For a timeless instant, there was nothing, no sound, no sight, no sensation, only the screaming echo of his own overloaded life force. Then, gravity remembered it had a job to do. He landed hard, the impact knocking the breath from his lungs and sending a jarring shock through his freshly healed bones. He lay sprawled on a surface that was too smooth, too cold. Cobblestone. He could smell damp earth, the faint, cloying scent of withered roses, and something else, something metallic and sharp that clung to the back of his throat. Copper. Naruto pushed himself up, his muscles screaming in protest. The overwhelming surge of Kurama's chakra had receded, leaving him feeling hollowed out, scraped raw from the inside. He was in an alley, the towering, oppressive walls of Gothic buildings leaning in on either side, their gargoyle-mouthed drainpipes frozen in silent screams. Above, the sky was a bruised purple, a perpetual twilight illuminated by a moon that was too large and too silver. Its light casting sharp, predatory shadows. There was no sun. He took a deep, shuddering breath and immediately knew something was profoundly wrong. He tried to reach out, to feel the life of the world around him. The familiar hum of nature energy. There was nothing. It was like trying to breathe in a vacuum. The world was silent, inert, dead. For a censor and a sage, the absolute emptiness was more terrifying than any army. Kurama, he whispered, his voice hoarse. A low, tired rumble answered him from the depths of his consciousness. I'm here. But the world, it's wrong. The energy is thin, stagnant. Like a grave. Naruto staggered out of the alleyway, his hand instinctively going to the kunai pouch on his thigh. It was still there, a small comfort in this sea of wrongness. He emerged into a grand plaza. A vast expanse of polished obsidian stone surrounded by towering spires and cathedrals that clawed at the violet sky. Ornate, gas-lit lamps cast a sickly yellow glow, illuminating the few figures that moved through the square. They moved with a languid grace that was unsettling, their forms pale and elongated in the dim light. No one laughed, no children played, the only sounds were the soft scrape of leather on stone and the rustle of heavy fabrics. He was a splash of vibrant, offensive color in this monochrome world. His orange jacket, though tattered and bloodstained, might as well have been a bonfire. Heads turned, pale faces with eyes that were too dark, too knowing, fixed on him. It wasn't curiosity in their gazes. It was appraisal, like a pack of wolves spotting a stray lamb. He ignored them, his shinobi training kicking in. Assess the situation, find high ground, identify threats. Before he could take another step, the low hum of the plaza was shattered by a sharp, commanding voice. You dare impede the passage of the Queen's procession. Naruto turned. On one side of the plaza, a cadre of figures had appeared. They were clad in scarred, dark gray plate mail and thick furs. Their faces grim and chiseled from granite. They carried heavy, brutal-looking axes and swords. At their lead stood a giant of a man, his bald head covered in ritualistic scars. His eyes burning with cold fire. Facing them, a second group had formed a defensive line. These were a different breed entirely. They wore ornate, silver-gilded armor that seemed more ceremonial than practical, and carried slender, elegant rapiers. Their leader was a man with long, silver hair tied back in a severe tail, his handsome face marred by a contemptuous sneer. Your queen has no authority in Duskfall, Herolf. The silver-haired man hissed, his voice like silk sliding over a razor's edge. This is neutral ground. We go where we please. The giant, Herolf, let out a low growl that seemed to shake the very stones. Lady Isolde's patience for your southern decadence wears thin, Valerius. Step aside, or be moved. I would like to see you try, you northern savage, Valerius replied, his hand drifting to the hilt of his rapier. Naruto's eyes darted between the two groups. He didn't know the politics, didn't understand the factions, but he knew the moment before a battle began. He could feel the coiled tension, the killing intent radiating from both champions. He was standing almost directly in the middle of the plaza, right in the kill zone. Civilians, if that's what the pale onlookers were already melting back into the shadows, leaving the central square ominously empty save for the three parties. Just my luck, Naruto thought, subtly shifting his weight to the balls of his feet. Herolf let out a battle cry and charged, his greatsword, a monstrous slab of iron, whistling through the air. Valerius met the charge not with force, but with impossible speed. He blurred, his rapier a silver flicker aimed at the giant's throat. Naruto didn't have time to think. He just acted. He slammed his palms together, a plume of smoke erupting around him. 4 Shad. Ao clones shot out in 4 different directions. 2 went for Herolf, one leaping low to sweep his legs while the other threw a handful of kunai not at him, but at the ground just in front of him. The explosion of sparks and the sudden attack on his balance made the giant stumble, his perfectly aimed swing thrown wide. The other 2 clones went for Valerius. They didn't try to attack him directly, his speed was too great. Instead, they boxed him in, their movements a coordinated dance designed to limit his options, forcing him to parry and sidestep, his fluid advance broken. While his clones caused chaos, the real Naruto exploded forward. The ground cracked under the force of his chakra-enhanced leap. He appeared between the 2 combatants in the space of a heartbeat. He didn't draw a weapon. He held out his right hand, the air itself seeming to scream as a sphere of pure, vibrant blue chakra materialized, a miniature storm of violent, rotating energy. Rasengan. He didn't slam it into either of them. He drove it straight down into the obsidian plaza. The impact was deafening. The stone didn't just shatter, it vaporized. A perfect circle of the plaza erupted into dust and shrapnel, a shockwave of raw, untamed life energy blasting outward. Herolf and Valerius, beings of the eternal night, were thrown back as if struck by a physical blow. They recoiled from the sheer vibrancy of the jutsu, its pure, chaotic energy anathema to their cold, ordered existence. They stared, momentarily stunned, their killing intent forgotten. Before they could recover, Naruto moved. He flickered, a blur of orange and black, appearing behind Herolf. A sharp, precise chop to the nerve cluster where the brute's neck met his shoulder sent a jolt of lightning through his system. The greatsword slipped from his numb fingers and clattered to the ground. In the same instant, Naruto kicked off Herolf's back, spinning through the air towards Valerius. The silver-haired fencer, his eyes wide with disbelief, tried to bring his rapier up. But Naruto was already inside his guard. With his left hand, he caught Valerius's wrist in an iron grip, and with his right, he plucked the rapier from his grasp, reversing it and pressing the blunted pommel to the man's throat. Silence. The entire plaza was frozen. Naruto stood in the center of the crater he had created, breathing just a little heavily. He held Valerius's own sword to his throat while Herolf was shaking his head, trying to clear the static from his vision. The clones dissipated in puffs of smoke. It had taken less than 5 seconds. He had disarmed 2 champions. Warriors who radiated an aura of ancient power that made most Jonin look like academy students, without shedding a drop of their blood. "All right," Naruto said, his voice cutting through the ringing silence. "Can we all just take a step back and calm down before someone gets hurt?" It was then that the crowds parted. The onlookers, who had been a silent ring of predators, now bent their heads. Some even sinking to one knee. 2 figures emerged from the shadows, approaching from opposite sides of the plaza. They moved with an unhurried, liquid grace that made the ground itself seem to welcome their tread. Every eye was on them. Every breath was held. The sheer weight of their presence was suffocating. From the northern side came a woman of severe, breathtaking beauty. She was tall and statuesque, clad in battle-worn armor of interlocking black steel plates, a heavy fur cloak draped over her shoulders. Her hair was the color of snow, braided with iron rings, and her eyes were a piercing, glacial blue. She was Queen Isolde, and she looked upon the world as if it were a flawed battle plan in need of correction. Her gaze fell on her defeated champion, Herolf, not with anger, but with a flicker of disappointed analysis, before locking onto Naruto. From the south came a woman who was her perfect opposite. Where the first was steel and ice, this one was silk and shadow. She wore a gown of deep crimson that seemed to drink the very light from the air, adorned with jewels that glittered like captured stars. Her skin was flawless alabaster, her hair a cascade of raven-black curls. And her eyes were the color of rich amethyst, sparkling with an ancient, dangerous intelligence. She was Queen Seraphina, and her lips were curved in a faint, knowing smile as she surveyed the scene. Her eyes finally coming to rest on Naruto with an expression of profound fascination. Herolf, Queen Isolde's voice was low and resonant, like the grinding of glaciers. "Stand down, Valerius." Queen Seraphina's voice was a melodic whisper, yet it carried across the plaza with absolute authority. "You have made your point. Now cease." Their champions, shamed but obedient, bowed their heads and retreated, melting back into their respective entourages. The 2 queens continued their silent, inexorable approach until they stood at the edge of the crater Naruto had made, regarding him not as a man, but as a phenomenon. The air thrummed with their power. It was nothing like chakra. It was older, colder, a pressure that felt like being at the bottom of a deep, dark ocean. Naruto released Valerius, tossing the rapier back to him with a flick of his wrist. He stood his ground, meeting their gazes, his hand never straying far from his kunai pouch. He was outmatched, he knew that. But he'd be damned if he'd show it. "You are not of this world," Queen Isolde stated. It was not a question. "Your life force," Queen Seraphina added, her amethyst eyes glowing faintly. "It burns like a newborn star. An impossibility." Naruto shrugged, affecting a casualness he was far from feeling. "Yeah, well, I've been called a lot of things." "Where exactly is here?" "You stand in the city of Duskfall, in the heart of the Obsidian Realm," Isolde answered, her eyes scanning him from head to toe, cataloging his strange clothes, his bright hair, the whisker marks on his cheeks. "A world of eternal night," Seraphina elaborated, her smile widening slightly, "ruled by those such as us. We are vampires." Naruto's blood ran cold. Vampires. Creatures of myth and legend, even in a world of ninjas and tailed beasts. It explained the pallor of their skin, the unsettling grace, the predatory stillness. It explained the deadness of this world, the absence of nature energy. "And you," Isolde continued, taking a step closer. Her glacial eyes intent. You are the one spoken of in the Crimson Covenant. The prophecy shared among all the great houses. Serafina glided forward to stand beside her. A perfect picture of dark elegance next to the warrior queen's brutal functionality. A being of pure life, a warrior forged in a sunlit world, destined to arrive in a torrent of impossible power. The prophecy calls you the Crimson Sage. Naruto couldn't help but let out a short, incredulous laugh. A sage, lady, I'm just a guy who got lost on his way home from work. Look, I don't want any trouble. If you can just point me to the nearest interdimensional exit, I'll be on my way. Isolde's expression didn't change. There is no exit, not for one who arrived as you did. The tear in reality, tie that brought you here was a cosmic accident, a one-way door, Serafina explained patiently, as if to a child. But your arrival was no accident. It was fate. She gestured around the plaza, at the silent, watchful figures. Our world is dying. The vitae, the very blood of our existence, grows thin and corrupted. An ancient enemy stirs in the darkness. Our bloodlines are fading, our strength is waning. And our kingdoms are fractured by endless, petty wars. The prophecy states, Isolde cut in, her tone direct and uncompromising, that the Crimson Sage will be the one to unite the Obsidian thrones. He will be the consort to the queens, the anchor of our power, and the sire of a new generation. A generation that can withstand the coming darkness, and perhaps, even walk in the sun. Naruto stared at them, his mind reeling. Consort, queens, prophecy. It was too much. Whoa, back up. Consort, to who? You two. He pointed from one to the other. And what do you mean, sire? A faint blush, like a drop of blood in milk, touched Serafina's cheeks. The details can be discussed. But the essence of the bargain is this. Isolde stepped forward, her presence demanding his full attention. You are a warrior of unparalleled skill and a wellspring of life energy the likes of which this realm has never seen. We need that strength. We need you. Fight with us. Stand with us. Help us save our world. And in return, Naruto asked, his eyes narrowing. He understood transactions. Power for power. We offer you sanctuary, Serafina said. We offer you power and station beyond the dreams of any mortal. And, once our world is secure, we will focus the combined might and ancient knowledge of all the vampire kingdoms on a single task, finding a way to reopen the path to your home. It was an offer he couldn't refuse. Because it was the only offer he had. He was alone, stranded in a dead world ruled by ancient, powerful monsters who were, for some reason, offering him a deal instead of simply taking what they wanted. He was a shinobi. You adapt, you survive, you find the angle. This was the only angle he could see. He looked from Isolde's cold, determined face to Serafina's intelligent, calculating eyes. He was a pawn in their game, a piece they needed for a cosmic chessboard he didn't understand. But Naruto had never been a good pawn. If he was going to play, he was going to play to win. He let out a long breath, the tension finally draining from his shoulders. He met their gazes, his own blue eyes hard and clear. Fine, he said, the word echoing in the silent plaza. I'll play your game, for now. A flicker of triumph, cold and sharp as ice in Isolde's eyes. A slow, satisfied smile spreading across Serafina's lips. They had their Crimson Sage, as their entourages, materialized from the shadows to escort him. Naruto took one last look at the bruised purple sky and the too large moon. He had a feeling getting home was going to be the least of his problems. Chapter 1 End. Chapter 2. The Trial of Fangs. The Crimson Court was a monument to impossible architecture. It wasn't a single castle but a cluster of elegant, blood-black spires connected by graceful, arched bridges that spanned bottomless chasms. It was built within a colossal cavern, the ceiling so high it was lost in shadow, dotted with glowing crystals that mimicked a starfield. This was Duskfall's neutral heart, the seat of the Vampire Queen's Council, a place of suffocating history and silent, watchful eyes. Naruto's quarters were more luxurious than any room he had ever stayed in, filled with dark, polished wood, velvet curtains. And a bed that could have slept 10. It felt less like a home and more like a gilded cage. He was a guest of honor, a prophesied savior, which meant he couldn't take 3 steps without a silent, pale-faced guard appearing at his elbow, or feel the weight of a dozen unseen stares from the shadowed archways above. They were watching him, gauging him, this strange, sun-colored creature who had fallen into their world of night. He spent the first few days exploring, a restless energy thrumming under his skin. He couldn't meditate. The utter lack of nature-ine. RGY made the practice feel like shouting into a void. So he walked, mapping the labyrinthine corridors of the Crimson Court, his senses on high alert. He was cataloging exits, guard rotations, and the subtle shifts in the cold, stagnant air. Old habits died hard. It was on the third day, while tracing a path along a seldom-used balcony overlooking one of the deeper chasms, that he felt it. A flicker, a minute disturbance in the air behind him, so faint that a normal person would have missed it. Even most shinobi would have. But for Naruto, whose senses were honed by 1,000 battles and a EP connection to the life force he could no longer feel, it was like a single sour note in a silent symphony. He didn't turn. He didn't tense. He kept walking, his pace even, his posture relaxed. And a hand through his blonde hair as if brushing it from his eyes, a casual gesture that let him glimpse his reflection in the polished obsidian of the balcony wall. There was nothing there, just the empty corridor behind him. But the feeling persisted. It was a pocket of absolute silence, a predator's void. The air didn't move around it. Light seemed to bend away from it. He was being hunted. A test, Kurama rumbled in his mind. The fox's voice laced with a predatory amusement. They want to see what you're made of, kid. Yeah, I figured, Naruto thought back, a slow grin spreading across his face. Let's give them a show. He turned a corner into a long, tapestry-lined hall. At the far end was a heavy, ornate door. He quickened his pace, his footsteps echoing just a little too loudly. It was a deliberate invitation. As he reached for the door's iron ring, the attack came. There was no sound, no rush of wind. The shadow simply detached from the wall beside him, coalescing into a humanoid shape cloaked in absolute black. A slender, pale hand, fingers like daggers, reached for his shoulder. This wasn't an attack meant to kill, it was an exercise in dominance. To touch him, unseen and unheard, would be a statement. You are clumsy. You are slow. We can take you whenever we wish. But the hand closed on empty air. In the instant before it landed, Naruto's body dissolved into a swirl of leaves that scattered across the floor. A classic substitution jutsu, simple, effective, and completely alien to this world. The assassin froze, its head, shrouded in a cowl of darkness, snapping from side to side. It had been certain. There was no flicker of movement, no burst of speed. The target had simply ceased to be. A floorboard creaked softly 20 feet back down the hall. The assassin blurred, moving with a silent, liquid speed that was breathtaking. It arrived at the source of the sound to find only an overturned suit of antique armor. Another trick. A low chuckle echoed from the opposite end of the hall. The assassin spun around. Naruto was standing there, leaning against the far wall, arms crossed, that same infuriating grin on his face. You're fast, Naruto complimented, his voice conversational. But you put too much weight on your left foot when you lunge. Gives you away every time. The assassin didn't reply. It simply sank back into the shadows, vanishing completely. Naruto's grin faded. His eyes closed. He stood perfectly still, breathing evenly. He wasn't trying to see or hear. He was trying to feel. It was harder here, without nature's help, but his own chakra was a sensor. He could feel the faint ripples it made in the dead energy of the court. He just had to listen to the echoes. There, a displacement of air to his left. A subtle warping of light near the ceiling. A faint scrape, less than a whisper, from the flagstones to his right. He was surrounded. This wasn't one assassin. It was a team. Fine. He'd play. He slapped his hands together. Shadow clone jutsu. Smoke billowed through the hall. When it cleared, there were 50 Narutos, all with the same cocky grin, all bouncing on the balls of their feet. They scattered, running in every direction, shouting taunts and insults. Turning the silent, dignified hall into a chaotic marketplace. The assassins were masters of stealth and precision, built for stalking a single, unaware target. This anarchic mess was a tactical nightmare for them. They were forced to reveal themselves, shadows detaching from walls to strike at the clones, which dissipated in harmless puffs of smoke. With every move they made, the real Naruto, hidden among the chaos, gathered more information. He saw how they used the shadows to teleport short distances, how they coordinated with subtle hand gestures, how their movements were utterly silent until the moment of the strike. He saw their patterns. And he saw his opening. One of the assassins reappeared on a high crossbeam, its attention focused on a clone running directly below it. For a split second, its focus was absolute. That was all Naruto needed. The real Naruto, who had been crouched behind a suit of armor, exploded upward. He didn't leap. He practically teleported, a burst of chakra from his feet launching him like a cannonball. He was on the crossbeam before the assassin could even register his presence. He didn't use a Rasengan or a flashy jutsu. He just slammed his fist into the stone wall right beside the assassin's head. The entire crossbeam shattered, a spiderweb of cracks erupting from the point of impact. The assassin, its concentration broken, tumbled from its perch. Naruto caught it by the collar of its dark tunic in midair, using their momentum to swing them both towards the large, ornate door at the end of the hall. They crashed through it, the ancient wood splintering into 1,000 pieces. They landed in a roll inside a dusty, forgotten storage room filled with discarded furniture draped in white cloths. Before the assassin could recover, Naruto had it pinned against the floor, a kunai pressed gently against the pale skin of its throat. All the shadow clones outside vanished. The hall fell silent once more. The assassin lay perfectly still. Slowly, a slender hand reached up and pulled back its shadowy cowl. It was a woman, shockingly young, with wide, silver eyes and pointed ears. Her face was a mask of cold fury and profound disbelief. Naruto removed the kunai. "You're good," he said, his voice quiet. He stood up and offered her a hand. "But you rely too much on your tricks. Sometimes a straight punch is all you need." She stared at his outstretched hand as if it were a venomous snake, then slapped it away and rose to her feet with a fluid grace. She gave him a single, lingering look, a mixture of humiliation and something else. Something he couldn't quite read, then melted into a shadow in the corner and was gone. Naruto let out a long breath. He looked down at his fist. It was scraped raw, but already healing. He'd shown them he was more than just a wellspring of energy. He was a shinobi. News of the Shadow Clan's failure spread through the Crimson Court like wildfire. The story became more embellished with each telling. He had fought 20 assassins blindfolded, he had turned their own shadows against them, he had shattered stone with a single glance. The whispers changed. He was no longer just a curiosity. He was a threat, or an asset, for the Bloodmane clan, a house that traced its lineage back to the most brutal and powerful warriors of the ancient wars. There was only one way to measure a man's worth. They issued a formal challenge the next morning. It was delivered by a herald who announced it to the entire court. Naruto Uzumaki, the Crimson Sage, was summoned to the Grand P. Roving Ground to answer the challenge of Lord Kalen of the Bloodmane clan. The proving ground was a massive, circular arena carved from the cavern's floor, surrounded by tiers of stone benches. Hundreds of vampires had gathered to watch. Their dark, elegant forms filling the stands, their collective gaze a heavy, palpable weight. At one end, on a throne-like dais, sat Queen Isolde, her face an unreadable mask of ice. Queen Serafina was not present, her duties apparently keeping her in the southern spires of the court. In the center of the arena stood Lord Kalen. He was a monster of a man, even taller than Heralf, his champion. He was bare-chested, his torso a roadmap of jagged scars. His arms were as thick as tree trunks, and he carried no weapon. He didn't need one. His fists, capped with thick, claw-like nails, were weapons enough. He radiated an aura of raw, physical power and unrestrained bloodlust. Naruto walked onto the sand, the low murmur of the crowd falling into a hush. He wore his usual attire, which felt ridiculously out of place in this gothic gladiatorial setting. Outworlder, Kalen's voice was a gravelly roar. You play with shadows and tricks. Here, in the circle of truth, only strength matters. Show me if the prophecy has given us a warrior, or just another court magician. Naruto cracked his neck. Been a while since I got to cut loose. Don't disappoint me. Kalen let out a bellow of laughter and charged. It was like watching a mountain move. The ground shook with his every step. Naruto stood his ground, waiting. Just as the vampire lord reached him, His massive fist raised to crush Naruto's skull, Naruto dropped. He swept Kalen's legs, a move that should have sent the giant tumbling. It was like kicking a statue. Kalen barely rocked on his heels. His fist changed trajectory, smashing down towards Naruto on the ground. Naruto rolled away, the fist pulverizing the spot where his head had been, sending sand and rock fragments flying. He came up fast, driving a series of hard, precise strikes into Kalen's ribs, kidneys, and neck. It felt like punching a brick wall. The vampire lord grunted, more annoyed than hurt, and backhanded him. The blow sent Naruto flying across the arena. He hit the far wall with a sickening crunch, slumping to the ground. The crowd let out a collective, satisfied sigh. The fight was over. The Outworlder was no match for a true vampire's strength. Naruto coughed, spitting a glob of blood and a broken tooth onto the sand. Kurama's chakra was already flooding his system, knitting his cracked ribs back together, the tooth regrowing in its socket. He pushed himself to his feet, a wide, feral grin spreading across his face. "Okay," he said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "Okay, that's what I'm talking about." Kalen's eyes widened in surprise. No one took a direct hit from him and got back up, let alone smiled about it. "Now it's my turn," Naruto said. He blurred. This wasn't the flicker of a substitution. This was pure, unadulterated speed. He was a streak of orange lightning. He appeared in front of Kalen and drove his heel into the vampire's knee. There was a loud pop as the joint bent the wrong way. Kalen roared in pain and rage, swinging wildly. Naruto was no longer there. He was behind him, then to his side, a constant, untouchable phantom delivering a storm of blows. He wasn't trying to overpower Kalen anymore. He was dismantling him. Kalen grew more and more furious, his wild swings becoming slower, more predictable. He was a lumbering giant trying to swat a hornet. "Hold still and let me crush you," he roared. "No thanks." Naruto's voice answered from 3 places at once. 3 shadow clones appeared, surrounding the enraged vampire. They each began to form a Rasengan. Kalen hesitated, unsure which was the real one. It was the opening the real Naruto needed. He dropped the Rasengan he had been forming and shot forward, sliding under Kalen's clumsy guard. He placed his open palm on the vampire lord's chest. "Sorry about this," he said. He channeled a massive, controlled burst of chakra directly into Kalen's sternum. It wasn't a destructive blast. It was a concussive shockwave, pure force. Lord Kalen's eyes went wide, the breath driven from his lungs in a single, explosive gasp. He was lifted off his feet and sent hurtling backward, tumbling end over end until he crashed into the arena wall with enough force to crack the ancient stone. He slid to the ground, unconscious, a massive palm print-shaped bruise already darkening on his chest. The arena was utterly silent. The vampires stared, their immortal composure shattered. They had just witnessed a display of speed, resilience, and power that defied their understanding. He hadn't just beaten their champion of strength. He had systematically taken him apart and defeated him with a single, precise blow. Naruto stood over the fallen lord, his chest rising and falling. He looked up at the dais. Queen Isolde's icy eyes met his. He couldn't read her expression, but for the first time, he thought he saw a flicker of something beyond cold appraisal. Respect. Suddenly, a scream ripped through the stunned silence. It didn't come from the arena, but from the stands. A vampire lord, a cousin of Kalen's from a lesser house, was convulsing. His eyes, moments ago a deep crimson, were now glowing with a putrid, yellow light. Black veins bulged on his neck and forehead, and his body contorted at unnatural angles. "The corruption!" Someone shrieked. Panic erupted. The maddened lord leapt from his seat, his claws elongating, his teeth sharpening into needle-like fangs. He let out an inhuman screech, a sound of pure agony and hatred, and lunged at the vampire next to him. Royal guards in their black plate mail began to converge, their swords drawn. "Contain him," Isolde's voice boomed, cutting through the chaos. "Do not let him harm anyone." The guards struggled, their disciplined forma. Tions breaking against the berserker's terrifying, unnatural strength. He threw them aside like dolls, his movements jerky and impossibly fast. He was babbling, spitting words in a guttural, ancient I elect that no one had spoken in 5,000 years. They were going to have to kill him. Naruto could see it in their eyes. They were preparing for the killing blow. He acted without thinking. He aped from the arena floor into the stands, a 40-foot vertical jump that drew gasps from those who saw it. He landed between the guards and the rampaging vampire. Wait, he yelled. Don't kill him. The maddened lord saw him and shrieked, its yellow eyes locking onto the vibrant life force that poured from Naruto. It saw a feast. It lunged. Naruto met the charge. He didn't strike. He moved like water, flowing around the wild attacks. His hands a blur. He wasn't blocking. He was redirecting, tapping nerve clusters, disrupting the flow of the vampire's own corrupted energy. The vampire was strong, but it was all rage, no technique. Naruto ended it in seconds. A single, precise knife hand strike to the base of the skull, charged with just enough chakra to disrupt the nervous system without causing permanent damage. The vampire lord's eyes rolled back into his head, and he collapsed in a heap, unconscious but alive. Naruto stood over the second fallen vampire of the day, the chaos in the stand slowly receding into a stunned, watchful silence. He had saved one of them. A man who, moments before, had been sneering at his very existence. He looked up again at Queen Isolde. The mask was still there, but her glacial eyes were fixed on the subdued vampire, then on him, and the grim reality of their situation seemed to settle over the entire arena. This prophecy wasn't about glory or power. It was about survival. Later that evening, the summons came. It wasn't to the Grand Council chamber or the throne room. It was to a private study, high in a spire that few were ever permitted to enter. The room was a vast, circular library, the walls lined from floor to ceiling with ancient scrolls and leather-bound tomes. Starlight from the crystal-studded cavern roof filtered through a high, domed window, illuminating the swirling dust motes. A third queen was waiting for him. She was different from the other two. Where Isolde was a warrior and Serafina was a politician, this one was something else entirely. She was ancient in a way that defied comprehension. Her skin was like pale parchment, and her hair was the color of tarnished silver, so long it pooled on the floor around her feet. Her eyes were her most striking feature. They were pure black, without iris or sclera, like twin pools of night that seemed to hold the wisdom and weariness of millennia. This was Queen Lilith, the Loremaster, the Oracle of the Central Highlands. You have made a great deal of noise since your arrival, Outworlder, she said. Her voice was a dry, rustling whisper, like pages turning in a forgotten book. Seems to be a habit of mine, Naruto replied, standing in the center of the room. The air here was thick, heavy with the scent of old paper and ozone, the telltale sign of powerful, latent magic. You have proven you are fast. You have proven you are strong. But the threat we face cannot be punched into submission, Lilith stated, her black eyes never leaving his. It is a rot of the soul, a corruption of our very nature. So, I will ask you a question. Not a test of might, but of mind. She gestured to a large, ornate chair. He remained standing. Imagine, she whispered, her voice drawing him in, that our world is a single, ancient tree. A blight has taken root in its core, slowly poisoning it from within. You have two tools at your disposal. A woodsman's axe, sharp and swift, and a gardener's seed, small and slow to grow. With the axe, you can cut out the rot, but you will surely damage the healthy wood around it, perhaps even kill the tree. With the seed, you can plant a new tree beside the old one. It may take 1,000 years to grow to maturity, but it will be pure. The old tree, however, will certainly die in that time. Tell me, Crimson Sage, which tool do you choose? It was a classic political dilemma. The ruthless, pragmatic choice versus the idealistic, long-term one. Sacrifice the few to save the many, or let the present die for a perfect future. Naruto didn't even have to think about it. That's a stupid question, he said bluntly. Lilith's eyebrows, thin as spider's silk, rose a fraction of an inch. It was likely the first time in several centuries anyone had called her stupid. You give me two bad options and tell me to pick one, Naruto explained, his voice simple, direct, and utterly devoid of guile. I don't. I take the axe, but I don't use it to cut the tree. I use it to dig around the roots. I find the source of the blight, the poisoned soil it's growing in. Then I take the seed, and I use my own power to make it grow fast and strong. To help the old tree fight off the poison. You don't choose between saving a part of your world or saving the future. You put everything you have into saving it all, right now. You find a third option. If there isn't one, you make one. He met her starless eyes without flinching, his own blue eyes burning with an unshakable conviction. I don't sacrifice my friends. I don't give up on my people. I don't abandon my home. Ever. For a long moment, Lilith was silent. The ancient, all-knowing mask was still in place, but for the first time, a flicker of genuine surprise registered in those endless black eyes. She had expected a clever, strategic answer. She had expected a politician's pragmatism or a warrior's bloodlust. She had not expected this. This simple, unyielding, and utterly absurd idealism. It was a philosophy so alien to their world of eternal, cynical survival that it bordered on madness. Or brilliance. You are, she finally whispered, a hint of wonder in her dry voice. Far more dangerous than the prophecy ever suggested. He just grinned. You have no idea. That night, sleep would not come. He stood on the balcony of his chambers, staring out at the impossible, beautiful, and terrifying city of Duskfall. He was more alone than he had ever been in his life, and yet, he had never felt a greater sense of purpose. The sound of a single footstep on the stone behind him made him turn. It was Queen Isolde. She was out of her armor, dressed in a simple, dark tunic and trousers. Without the steel plates and fur cloak, she seemed smaller, though no less imposing. The council is pleased, she said. Her voice low. She came to stand beside him at the railing, her gaze fixed on the chasm below. You have passed the trials. The clans will honor the covenant. They weren't very subtle about it. Naruto noted. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, so fleeting he might have imagined it. Subtlety is a southern virtue. In the north, we prefer to know if a blade is sharp by testing its edge. They stood in silence for a moment, two warriors sharing a quiet space. The vampire you subdued in the arena, she said, her voice softer now. He will live. Lilith believes she can study him. Perhaps find a way to slow the corruption. You saved more than just his life today. I just did what I thought was right, he said with a shrug. Isolde turned to face him, her glacial blue eyes searching his. That is not a sentiment often heard in this court. Or in this world. She saw the scrapes on his knuckles from his fight with the assassin, the faint bruise on his cheek from Kalen's blow. She saw the weariness in his eyes, but beneath it, an unquenchable fire. You fight with a ferocity I have not seen since the Elder Wars. But you show mercy. It is a strange combination. Where I come from, you don't get one without the other, he said. She held his gaze for a long moment, an unspoken understanding passing between them. It wasn't about prophecies or politics. It was the simple, profound respect of one fighter for another. She saw past the legend of the Crimson Sage and saw the man. And he saw a flicker of the immense, lonely burden she carried as a queen and a protector of her people. Without another word, she gave him a curt, sharp nod, a gesture of acknowledgement from an equal, and then she was gone, a silent shadow disappearing back into the cold heart of the court. Naruto turned back to the view, a small smile on his face. He was still a prisoner, a pawn in a game he didn't understand. But today, he'd started to change the rules. And for T, he first time since he'd arrived in this world of eternal night, he felt a sliver of hope. Chapter 2 End. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Crimson Court. The aftermath of the trials was not a celebration, but a shift in the political landscape. As quiet and momentous as a glacier calving into the sea, Naruto was no longer a prophesied curiosity. He was a proven asset, a weapon of unprecedented power now formally aligned with the queens. The change was palpable. The stares of the ancient, predatory nobles were no longer dismissive or appraising. They were now calculating, weighing his potential impact on their own centuries-old ambitions. He had become a piece on the great board, and every player was re-evaluating their strategy. His gilded cage became a center of gravity. Where once he had been left to his own devices, now he was beset by a constant, subtle stream of visitors and invitations. He was invited to weapons demonstrations by warrior clans who now saw him as a peer, to lectures on bloodline purity by ancient aristocrats who wanted to gauge his intelligence, and to private musical recitals by courtiers who simply wanted to be seen in his presence. He navigated it all with a mix of shinobi-bred caution and his own innate, disarming bluntness. The most overt and, to Naruto, the most baffling, of these overtures came from Duke Cassian Volkov, a vampire of breathtaking beauty and serpentine charm. The Duke was a master of the southern court, a creature of silk and whispers whose influence was said to rival Queen Serafina's own in the opulent halls of her domain. He found Naruto in the court's armory, a cavernous hall where Naruto had taken to practicing his katas, the familiar movements a balm to his spirit in this alien world. Lord Uzumaki, Cassian's voice was like honeyed wine, smooth and intoxicating. He glided into the room, dressed in a tailored coat of black velvet that seemed to absorb the forge light. Such discipline, such raw physicality, it is a rare sight in these decadent times. Naruto finished his sequence, the motion ending with a sharp crack of displaced air. He turned, wiping a sheen of sweat from his brow. He didn't miss the way the Duke's dark, appreciative eyes lingered on his bare arms. Just trying to stay sharp, Naruto replied, grabbing a towel. Can I help you with something? You could, Cassian said, stepping closer, his scent a pleasant mix of old books and something faintly floral. He moved with a dancer's grace, invading Naruto's personal space with the casual confidence of one who was never denied. You are a subject of endless fascination, a being of pure life in a world of exquisite death. I find myself drawn to that warmth. I imagine many do. He reached out, his long, pale fingers intending to trace the line of Naruto's jaw. It was a practiced, intimate gesture, one that had likely disarmed and seduced countless individuals over the centuries. Naruto took a half step back, just enough for the Duke's fingers to miss their target. The move was subtle, almost accidental, but the message was clear. Look, Duke, right, Naruto said, his tone straightforward, lacking any of the coyness or flattery the courtier was used to. I'm not sure what game you're playing, but I'm not interested. If you want something, just ask for it. All this dancing around is giving me a headache. Cassian's smile didn't falter, but a flicker of genuine surprise, and perhaps irritation, crossed his eyes. He was accustomed to a dance of innuendo and suggestion. This blunt refusal was like a stone wall erected in the middle of a ballroom. No game, I assure you, he purred, recovering smoothly. Merely an appreciation for a unique talent. The queens have placed great faith in you. To have your ear, to be counted as your friend, would be a great honor. Right, a friend who wants to get in my pants to get closer to the queens, Naruto stated, crossing his arms. It wasn't an accusation, it was a simple observation. I get it, it's politics, but it's not going to work. My relationship with the queens is my business. If you want their favor, talk to them. The Duke's carefully constructed facade of seductive charm finally cracked. His smile tightened, becoming a predatory baring of teeth. You are surprisingly direct for one who looks so untamed. A word of advice, Outworlder. In this court, directness is mistaken for foolishness. You will not last long without allies. I'll take my chances, Naruto said with a shrug. He turned his back on the Duke, a calculated and deeply insulting gesture, and picked up a practiced sword. Now if you don't mind, I've got work to do. Duke Cassian stood there for a long moment, his handsome face a mask of cold fury. He had offered his favor, a prize many in the Obsidian realm would kill for, and had been dismissed like a common peddler. He turned and swept from the armory, his departure as silent and graceful as his arrival, leaving a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the stone walls. You made an enemy there, Kit, Kurama noted dryly from within. I know, Naruto replied. Better an enemy I can see than a friend who wants to stab me in the back. The next attempt on his standing was far less direct, and far more dangerous. It began subtly, with whispers. A rumor that the Crimson Sage was arrogant, that he disrespected the ancient traditions of the court. Then, a more specific accusation, that an artifact had gone missing from the Vault of Ages, a heavily guarded repository of vampire history, and that it had vanished the same night Naruto was seen walking the nearby corridors. He knew it was a setup. His shinobi senses screamed it. It was too neat, too convenient. The missing artifact, the Chalice of Vitae, was said to be a relic from the first vampires. A potent symbol of their lineage. Its theft was a grave insult, a crime bordering on blasphemy. Instead of getting angry or defensive, Naruto got to work. He didn't report his suspicions to the queens. That would be seen as paranoia. He needed proof. He created 2 shadow clones, perfect, solid copies of himself, and tasked them with maintaining his public routine. One went to the armory to train, the other to the library to read. Meanwhile, the real Naruto, cloaked in a simple illusion to make him appear as a low-ranking court servant, began his own investigation. He started at the Vault of Ages. The guards, members of the Stoic Iron Wardens, were unshakable. Their testimony was simple. The vault was sealed with a blood lock that only the 3 queens could open. No one had entered or left. The artifact was simply gone. It was a perfect locked room mystery. But Naruto knew that there was no such thing as a perfect crime, just an imperfect investigation. He slipped past the guards, not with speed, but by becoming one of the shadows they so carefully watched. He found no signs of forced entry, no lingering traces of foreign energy. But he did find something else. A single, almost microscopic scratch on the obsidian floor, near the base of the pedestal where the chalice had stood. It was a drag mark. The pedestal hadn't been opened, it had been moved. He followed the faint, almost imperceptible trail, a series of minute scrapes that led him away from the vault and down into the lower levels of the Crimson Court, into the service tunnels and ancient aqueducts that were the castle's veins. It was a maze, but it was a maze with a purpose. He could feel the faint, sickly sweet residue of the artifact's ancient power, a breadcrumb trail for his senses. The T-rail led him to the private chambers of Lord Malachi, a grim, austere vampire from an old but declining house, known for his staunch traditionalism and his vocal criticism of the queen's reliance on an outworlder. Naruto didn't confront him. He simply observed. He hid in the shadows of the rafters, watching as Malachi, in the privacy of his sanctum, gloated over the stolen chalice, planning to reveal it in Naruto's chambers at the opportune moment to frame him for the theft and sacrilege. It was a desperate, clumsy plan, born of a fear of irrelevance. Malachi believed Naruto's presence was a corruption of their society, and he was willing to break their most sacred laws to prove it. Naruto slipped away as silently as he had come, the proof he needed secured in his mind. But what to do with it? A public accusation would lead to a messy trial, a political schism. He needed a better way, a more decisive solution. And for that, he needed a guide. He sought out Alaric, the court's official loremaster. Alaric was an ancient, stooped vampire who looked more like a dried-up husk than a lord of the night. He resided in the Grand Archives, a library so vast it made Lilith's private study look like a closet. Alaric had been loremaster for 3,000 years. He had served the grandparents of the current queens. He was cynical, sarcastic, and utterly unimpressed with the day-to-day squabbles of immortal politicians. Naruto found him meticulously restoring a crumbling scroll, his long, skeletal fingers surprisingly gentle. "They say you know everything that happens in this court, old man," Naruto said, leaning against a towering bookshelf. Alaric didn't look up. "They say a lot of things. They also say you're a prophesied savior. I find it's best to ignore 90% of what they say." "I need to know about Lord Malachi," Naruto said, cutting to the chase. This time, Alaric did look up, his faded, gray eyes peering at Naruto over a pair of delicate, silver-rimmed spectacles. "Ah, the great traditionalist. A man so in love with the past he's failed to notice the present is on fire. What has the old fossil done now? Accused you of tracking mud on his favorite memory?" "Something like that," Naruto said. "He's trying to frame me for stealing the chalice of Vitae." Alaric actually chuckled, a dry, rattling sound like dead leaves skittering across pavement. "Ambitious. And foolish. That relic is so drenched in old magic it leaves a trail a blind ghoul could follow. What do you intend to do? Expose him before the council?" "I was thinking about it. But that seems messy." "Messy is an understatement," Alaric said, setting down his tools. "You'd spark a feud between the houses that would last 500 years. Malachi's clan is old, and old things have deep roots. You'd be mired in political maneuvering until you turn to dust. Is that what you want?" "No, I want to shut him down. Permanently." Alaric studied him for a long moment, a flicker of genuine interest in his ancient eyes. "You are not at all what I expected. The queens see a weapon. The lords see a threat. I see a craftsman. You're looking for the right tool for the job. He tapped a long finger on the table. There is to be a grand ball in 3 nights' time. To formally present you to the allied houses. Everyone will be there. Serafina's idea, of course. She loves her pageantry. A ball? Naruto asked, unable to keep the distaste from his voice. Precisely, Alaric said with a grim smile. The perfect stage. A place of high ceremony, where every action is magnified, every word scrutinized. A place where a public humiliation can be more devastating than a blade to the heart. The hours leading up to the ball were a blur of activity. Naruto spent a significant amount of time with Queen Serafina. She insisted on overseeing his attire for the evening, claiming that his usual orange jacket would cause a diplomatic incident with the color spectrum itself. He found her not in her opulent throne room, but in a solar high in her spire, surrounded by maps and ledgers. The weight of her crown was visible in the faint, tired lines around her amethyst eyes. Trade disputes with the western houses. A blight affecting the fungus farms that feed our blood thralls, and Heralf broke another training dummy, the 3rd this week, she said, gesturing to the stacks of parchment without looking up. And now I must play dress up with our new consort. The joys of being a queen. There was no self-pity in her voice, only a deep, abiding weariness. You don't have to, Naruto said, pulling up a chair. Just give me something black and I'll be fine. She finally looked at him, a genuine smile touching her lips. And let you walk into a convocation of the most powerful nobles in the realm looking like a common foot soldier. I think not. Appearances are everything, Naruto. They are the armor we wear in our bloodless wars. She showed him the tunic of black silk and the dark gray, high-collared jacket that had been prepared. It was elegant, severe, and utterly unlike him. As a servant helped him into it, he felt a strange kinship with the queen. They were both playing a role, wearing a costume for the benefit of others. While they waited, he noticed a game board set up on a low table. It was intricate, a circular board with pieces of carved obsidian and ivory. What's this? That, Serafina said, a spark of interest in her eyes, is called Sivas. A game of strategy, of deception and sacrifice. It is a passion of mine. Teach me, he said. She raised an eyebrow. It takes a lifetime to master. Quote, good thing you've had a few of those, then, he grinned. They played for an hour. Serafina was a master, her moves elegant, precise, and ruthless. She built her defenses, controlled the board, and slowly constricted his options. He, in turn, played like he fought. He was aggressive, unpredictable, sacrificing valuable pieces in reckless gambits that seemed foolish but served to shatter her carefully constructed strategies. He lost, of course. But he took her queen and left her king exposed, forcing a stalemate from a position of certain defeat. Ina stared at the board for a long time after he made his final move. You play with no regard for the rules of engagement, she said, though there was no anger in her voice. Only a dawning respect. Quote, you don't try to win the game they're playing. You force them to play yours. Something like that, Naruto said. She looked at him then, really looked at him. Not as the Crimson Sage, not as a political asset, but as the man who had shown her an entirely new way to look at a battlefield she thought she had mastered. A bond, forged not by prophecy but by a shared moment of intellectual intimacy, settled between them. The grand ball was a sensory overload. The hall was a breathtaking cavern of polished marble, lit by thousands of floating candles that cast a warm, golden glow. A string orchestra played a haunting, melancholic melody. Hundreds of vampires, dressed in the height of immortal fashion, mingled and conversed, their voices a low, dangerous hum beneath the music. Naruto stood beside the queens on a raised dais, feeling ridiculously out of place in his borrowed finery. Isolde was a column of black iron and white fur beside him, her presence a silent, deadly promise. Lilith was a whisper of shadow, her black eyes seeing everything. And Serafina was a vision in blood-red silk, the perfect hostess, her smile never faltering as she greeted duke after duke, lord after lord. Naruto's senses were stretched taut. He ignored the polite greetings and the fawning nobles. He was watching. He saw Lord Malachi across the room, speaking in hushed tones with Duke Cassian, who shot Naruto a look of pure venom. He saw the way the guards were positioned, the exits, the shadowed alcoves. The plan Alaric had helped him devise was simple. Malachi intended to have a servant, paid off and charmed, plant the chalice in Naruto's chambers during the ball. Then, at the height of the evening, he would call for a search, revealing the truth, and disgracing Naruto in front of the entire ruling class. But Naruto had already moved the pieces on the board. One of his clones, disguised again as a servant, had been shadowing Malachi's agent all evening. The moment came. Serafina had just finished a toast, her voice ringing through the silent hall. Lord Malachi stepped forward, his face a mask of false piety. "Your Majesties," he began, his voice booming. "It is with a heavy heart that I must interrupt these festivities. But a great sacrilege has been committed. The chalice of Vitae has been stolen from the Vault of Ages." A wave of shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd. "I have it on good authority," Malachi continued, his eyes fixing on Naruto with theatrical sorrow, "that the thief is among us. I demand that the chambers of the Outworlder be searched." All eyes turned to Naruto. He could feel the weight of their suspicion, their fear, their hope that this powerful anomaly would finally be brought low. Before any of the queens could speak, Naruto stepped forward, a calm, easy smile on his face. "That's a serious accusation, Lord Malachi," he said, his voice carrying easily across the hall. "Are you sure about that? Because I was under the impression this was the chalice of Vitae." He held up his hand. A shadow clone standing in a dark alcove near the main entrance dispelled itself in a puff of smoke, and in its place, the real Naruto appeared, holding a gleaming, golden chalice. He had used his clones to create a diversion, retrieve the item from Malachi's hiding spot, and then switch places with a clone on the dais in the blink of an eye. The entire hall gasped. Malachi's face went white. How? That's impossible, is it?" Naruto asked, walking forward. He tossed the chalice gently in the air and caught it. "It seems to me the only one who knew for sure. It was stolen was the person who stole it. Funny how that works." He stopped in front of Duke Cassian. "And I'm sure it's just a coincidence that the Lord who has been whispering poison about me all week is standing right next to the Lord who was trying to frame me." He looked from Malachi's panicked face to Cassian's icy fury. He hadn't just returned the artifact. He had publicly exposed the conspiracy, linking the two lords who had tried to undermine him. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't thrown a punch. He had defeated them with their own weapons: intrigue, deception, and public humiliation. He walked back to the dais and presented the chalice to a stunned Serafina. He leaned in close, his voice a whisper only she could hear. "You were right. Appearances are everything." She took the chalice, her amethyst eyes shining with a newfound, profound respect. He was not just their shield. He was their strategist, their unexpected king on a board filled with treacherous pawns. He had not only survived his first foray into their bloodless wars, he had dominated it. As the royal guard silently and efficiently escorted a protesting Lord Malachi and a seething Duke Cassian from the hall, a new kind of whisper filled the Crimson Court. It was no longer about the Outworlder, the prophecy, or the weapon. It was about the power behind the thrones, the Crimson Sage who had proven himself more than a match for their oldest and deadliest games. Chapter 3 End. Chapter 4. The Sunken City of Souls. The victory at the Grand Ball was a cold comfort. While Naruto had deftly navigated the treacherous currents of court politics, the deeper, more insidious threat continued to spread. The madness that had claimed Lord Kalen's cousin was not an isolated incident. Reports began to trickle in the outer domains. A revered elder in the western barrens succumbing to a violent frenzy, a coven of mystics in the southern marshes turning on each other in a cannibalistic rage. The Vitae, the very essence of their immortal existence, was becoming a poison. The afflicted vampire from the arena, now restrained in the deepest, most magically warded levels of the Crimson Court, was the focal point of their investigation. Queen Lilith had spent days observing him, her ancient, black eyes seeing things no one else could. She didn't see a madman, she saw a symptom. Naruto found her in her circular library, a place that was quickly becoming the strategic heart of their burgeoning war. She stood before a floating, three-dimensional map of the Obsidian Realm, its continents and oceans rendered in shimmering, magical light. Faint, ugly-looking red lines, like infected veins, were beginning to spread across the map from disparate points. "The corruption is accelerating," she stated without turning, her voice a dry rustle. "It follows the oldest bloodlines. The more ancient the vampire, the more susceptible they are. It is as if the very foundation of our race is beginning to rot." "Any idea what's causing it?" Naruto asked, studying the map. The red lines seemed to pulse with a faint, malevolent energy. "It is a resonance," Lilith explained, her long, silver-nailed finger tracing one of the lines. "A sympathetic vibration. Something has awoken, something ancient and powerful. Its awakening is creating a frequency that our oldest bloodlines are attuned to, and it is unraveling them. Driving them back to a primal, feral state. So we find the source of the broadcast and shut it down," Naruto said, his mind already working through the tactical possibilities. "If only it were so simple," Lilith sighed. "The source is not a place. It is a being, and its prison is weakening. To understand what we are fighting, we must understand how we began. We must go to the place of our birth. We must go to a city that has not seen a living soul in 10,000 years." Her black eyes finally turned to him, and in their depths, he saw a gravity that chilled him to the bone. "We must go to Ethelberg, the sunken city." Alaric, the ancient loremaster, provided the history. He projected images from dusty scrolls onto the library walls, showing a city of impossible beauty, all gleaming white towers and graceful arches. Built on a peninsula that jutted out into a great inland sea. "Our genesis," Alaric explained, his voice hushed with reverence. "Before we were creatures of the night. We were a people who worshipped the sun. Ethelberg was our capital. Our greatest sorcerer kings, in a desperate bid for immortality, performed a great ritual. They attempted to capture the essence of a celestial being, a creature of starlight and divine energy, and bind it to their bloodlines." The image on the wall shifted, showing the city in flames, tidal waves crashing over the gleaming towers. "The ritual succeeded, and it failed," Alaric continued. "They gained immortality, the power to command the shadows, and a thirst for blood. But the celestial being, in its death throes, cursed them. The sun, their former god, became their enemy, and the very sea, enraged by the sacrilege, rose up and swallowed Ethelberg whole. The survivors, the first vampires, fled inland, founding the kingdoms we know today. But the source of our power, and our damnation, remains in those ruins." "The celestial being," Naruto said, a dawning realization in his voice. "That's what's waking up." "Precisely," Lilith confirmed. "Its prison, forged by the very ritual that created us, is failing. We must go there, to the heart of the cataclysm, and find the records of the first ritual. We must learn how they imprisoned it, so that we may reinforce the seals. Or, if the worst comes to pass, understand what is required to defeat it when it breaks free." The journey itself was a descent into a forgotten world. The entrance to the sunken city was not on any map. It was a hidden way, a submerged tunnel system accessible only through a remote, bleak stretch of coastline known as the Weeping Coast, a place of perpetual, drizzling rain and black, volcanic rock. Their expedition was small and specialized. It was just Naruto and Lilith, accompanied by a retinue of 5 of Lilith's personal guards, the Silent Oracles. They were wraith-like figures, clad in dark, form-fitting leather armor, their faces hidden by porcelain masks, each a powerful blood mage in their own right. The entrance was a gaping maw in the seafloor, a vortex of dark, churning water. Lilith performed a complex ritual, her whispered words weaving a bubble of breathable air and pressure resistance around their small group. As they descended into the crushing, absolute darkness of the abyss, Naruto felt a profound sense of unease. He was a creature of the land and the sky. This was an alien, suffocating environment. The only light came from a soft, silvery glow emanating from Lilith's hands. The ruins of Ethelberg appeared out of the gloom like the skeleton of some colossal, dead leviathan. The gleaming white towers were, now gray and encrusted with millennia of oceanic growth. Unnatural currents, remnants of the ancient cataclysm, pulled at them, trying to dash them against the crumbling architecture. But what was truly unsettling were the creatures. The abyss was not empty. The raw, divine energy that had bled from the dying celestial being had twisted and mutated the local fauna. Schools of pale, eyeless fish rows of needle-like teeth swarmed them, their forms ghost-like in the magical light. A colossal squid, its tentacles tipped with razor-sharp barbs and its skin shimmering with a sickening, corrupt energy, emerged from a ruined colosseum and attacked, its movements driven by a primal, mindless rage. The silent oracles moved as one, their blood magic forming crimson lances that pierced the creature's hide. But it was Naruto who ended the fight. Trapped in the water, his speed and agility were hampered. So he did the last thing anyone expected. He stood his ground inside their air bubble, slammed his hands together, and created a dozen shadow clones. They couldn't leave the bubble, but they could act within it. Massive Rasengan barrage, he yelled, the sound unnaturally loud inside their pocket of air. Each clone, with his help, formed a giant Rasengan. They didn't throw them. They pressed them against the inside wall of their air bubble. The effect was monumental. The 12 spiralan G-vortexes of chakra turned the bubble of air into a depth charge. The shockwave that erupted outwards through the water was powerful enough to pulp the colossal squid into a cloud of ink and gore and send the smaller creatures fleeing into the darkness. It also, however, nearly shattered Lilith's protective spell. The bubble flickered and shrank, the crushing pressure of the deep threatening to implode it. Lilith's face was pale with strain, her hands trembling as she poured more of her power into maintaining the barrier. A crude solution, she gasped, her black eyes wide with a mixture of terror and awe. But undeniably effective. Hey, it worked, didn't it? Naruto grinned, though his own heart was pounding. They finally reached their destination, the Grand Cenotaph, the central spire, where the original ritual had taken place. It was remarkably preserved, sealed by ancient wards that had kept the ocean at bay. As they passed through the shimmering barrier into the dry, stale air of the cenotaph's interior, the pressure of the abyss was replaced by a different kind of pressure. A psychic weight, a palpable aura of ancient agony and rage, pressed in on them. The walls were covered in intricate carvings and inscriptions, a language so ancient even Lilith had to take a moment to decipher it. They depicted a race of sun worshippers, their desperate plea to the heavens, and the arrival of a being of light. But as the carvings progressed, they grew more frantic, more violent. They showed the being's capture, its vivisection, its essence being siphoned into the blood of the sorcerer kings. The final panel was one of pure horror. A great, multi-winged eye, weeping tears of fire as the city around it drowned. They didn't just bind it, Lilith whispered, her hand tracing the terrible image. They tore it apart. They used its very being as fuel for their immortality. No wonder it cursed them. It was then that they were attacked. Not by a mutated sea creature, but by something far more sinister. Figures emerged from the shadows of the cenotaph. They were clad in white and gold robes, their faces obscured by polished silver masks that depicted a serene, smiling face. There was nothing serene about the power they wielded. It was light, pure, searing, holy light, an energy that was anathema to every vampire in the room. The starlight ascendancy, one of the silent oracles hissed, drawing a blade that shimmered with dark energy. The cultists didn't speak. They moved with a zealot's purpose, launching bolts of golden energy that sizzled and burned wherever they struck. 2 of Lilith's oracles were incinerated before they could even react, their ancient forms turning to ash in a flash of agonizing light. Naruto moved, a blur of motion. Get her to the central chamber. He yelled to the remaining guards. Find the records. I'll hold them off. He met the ascendancy's charge head-on. It was like fighting solidified sunlight. Their attacks burned, not just his skin, but his very chakra. It was a purifying fire, designed to unmake beings of shadow and demonic energy. Kurama roared in his mind, the light feeling like acid to the fox's demonic nature. Naruto adapted. He couldn't use large-scale chakra attacks. It was like throwing gasoline on a fire. He had to rely on pure taijutsu, speed, and precision. He became a phantom, weaving between the searing bolts of light. His movements economical and deadly. A kunai to a throat, a precise kick to a knee, a disarming strike to an elbow. He was a whirlwind of controlled violence, taking down the cultists one by one. But their leader was different. A tall, imposing figure whose golden robes were more ornate, whose mask was etched with intricate patterns. This one wielded a spear made of solidified light, and its movements were as fluid and deadly as his own. Heretic. The leader's voice was a metallic, synthesized sound, devoid of emotion. You reek of the demon taint and the blood curse. You are an abomination in the eyes of the great Malevolentia. She will be reborn, and the world will be cleansed in her holy light. Malevolentia, Naruto grunted, parrying a vicious thrust of the light spear. The name resonated with the carvings on the wall. The name of the imprisoned celestial. So that was their game. They weren't just fanatics. They were trying to free their god. Their duel was a clash of opposites. Darkness and light, chakra and celestial energy. Naruto was faster, but the ascendancy leader's every blow carried that searing, corrupting energy. It was a battle of attrition, and Naruto knew he couldn't keep it up forever. Just as the leader found an opening, preparing to run him through with the spear, a low, powerful hum filled the cenotaph. The ancient runes on the walls began to glow with a deep crimson light. Lilith and her remaining guards had reached the ritual chamber. The leader of the ascendancy hesitated, its head turning towards the source of the power. No, they are tampering with the sacred seals. Quote, that moment of distraction was all Naruto needed. He channeled sage mode. For a terrifying second, he thought it wouldn't work. The deadness of the world, the crushing pressure, the lack of nature energy, but then, it came. Not from the world around him, but from within. From the vast, sun-like ocean of his own life force, amplified by Kurama. It was an imperfect, desperate version of sage mode. Raw and unstable, but it was enough. The power slammed into him. The red markings appeared around his eyes. He didn't just move, he vanished. He reappeared behind the cultist leader. A Rasengan already formed in his hand. But this one was different. It was infused with the raw, unstable nature energy of his makeshift sage mode. It was a churning ball of golden-orange light, a miniature sun of pure life. He drove it into the leader's back. The cultist didn't scream. It simply unraveled. The holy light that composed its armor, its spear, its very being, was overwhelmed by the sheer, untamable life force of the attack. It was like a candle being snuffed out by a hurricane. The white robes and silver mask fell to the floor, empty. Naruto collapsed to one knee, panting. The unstable sage mode receding, leaving him drained and shaking. The remaining cultists, seeing their leader destroyed, hesitated, then retreated back into the abyssal darkness from which they came. Lilith and her guards emerged from the central chamber. She was clutching a large, cylindrical data crystal, its surface glowing with faint, shifting runes. I have it, she said, her voice strained. The full schematics of the ritual. The celestial's true name. The nature of the seals. She looked at the empty robes on the floor, then at Naruto. And now we know the name of our enemy. The Starlight Ascendancy. They are not trying to stop the corruption. They are its source. They are actively trying to break the prison. Their mission was a success, but the cost was high, and the knowledge they had gained was terrifying. They were not just fighting a creeping madness. They were fighting a holy war. As they began their perilous ascent from the crushing darkness of the sunken city, a single, horrifying thought echoed in Naruto's mind. The Ascendancy's leader had called him a heretic, an abomination. They had recognized the power of Kurama within him. This wasn't just a fight for the vampire world. For the first time since he had arrived, Naruto realized this enemy might have the power, and the motive, to follow him home. The stakes had just become personal. Chapter 4 End. Chapter 5. Scars of the Ascendancy. The knowledge unearthed from Ethelberg did not bring relief. It settled over the Crimson Court like a shroud. The enemy had a name, the Starlight Ascendancy, a goal as clear and terrible as a shard of glass. The liberation of their caged god, Malevolentia, through the utter annihilation of the vampire race. The creeping corruption, the madness in the blood, was merely the prelude. The first tremor of the coming earthquake. War was no longer a possibility whispered in the shadows, it was a declared reality, and its first front was already being drawn. The Grand Council Chamber, a place usually rife with political maneuvering and veiled insults, was now a grim war room. Lilith's floating map of the realm dominated the center of the room, the angry red veins of the Viti corruption now overlaid with clusters of golden pinpricks, marking confirmed sightings of Ascendancy forces. Most of these sightings were concentrated along the bleak, mountainous northern border, Isolda's domain. They are testing our defenses, Isolda stated, her voice flat and hard as the steel of her gauntlets. She stood before the map, her arms crossed, her entire posture a study in coiled tension. Raids on outlying patrols, probes of our watchtowers. They use this light of theirs. Our warriors burn before they can even draw their swords. They are ghosts we cannot fight. They fight a holy war, Isolde. Serafina countered from her seat at the great obsidian table, her fingers steepled before her. It will not be won by meeting them blade for blade on a frozen mountain pass. We need intelligence. We need to understand their structure, their numbers, their leadership. And while you seek to understand, my people die, Isolde shot back, her glacial eyes flashing with a rare, hot anger. Frostfang Keep guards the only viable pass through the Dragon's Tooth Mountains. If it falls, the heartlands of my kingdom, a land my ancestors have bled for 10,000 years, will be open to them. Naruto, who had been listening silently, stepped forward. He had felt it the moment they returned from the sunken city, a shift in the air, the cold, sharp scent of an approaching storm. She's right. We can't just sit here and wait for them to make a move. We have to hit them. Hard. With what? Serafina challenged, her gaze turning to him. Your power is formidable, Naruto, but it is a single brilliant flame. They are a rising tide. Throwing you at them piecemeal is a foolish waste of our most vital asset. Before Naruto could retort, the great doors to the chamber burst open. A royal guardsman, his black armor scorched and his face pale with exhaustion, stumbled in and fell to one knee. He wore the sigil of Frostfang Keep. Your Majesty, he gasped, his voice ragged. The keep, it's under full assault. A legion of the gold and white ones, they appeared out of nowhere. The sky fire, it burns the walls, the men, we cannot hold them. The debate was over. The air in the room froze. Isolde's worst fears had been realized. She didn't hesitate. She was already turning, her fur-lined cloak sweeping behind her like the wings of a dark angel. Heralf, muster the Einherjar. We march in 5 minutes. I'm going with you, Naruto said, his voice leaving no room for argument. Isolde paused and looked at him. Serafina rose from her chair. Naruto, be reasonable. Your energy is a beacon. They will target you above all others. Good, Naruto said, a hard grin touching his lips. Let them. Better they target me than her soldiers. He met Isolde's gaze, and in that moment, a silent pact was made. Not between a queen and her consort, but between two warriors heading into the fire. She gave a single, sharp nod. Keep up, if you can. The journey north was a desperate, frantic flight. They traveled not by horse but by great, bat-winged beasts that rode the cold winds of the obsidian realm. Naruto, unused to the creatures, simply ran, his chalk raw, enhanced speed allowing him to keep pace, a streak of orange and black leaping across the jagged, dark landscape below. They saw the battle before they heard it. A pillar of golden light rose from the horizon, a hateful, artificial dawn in the perpetual twilight. It pulsed with a sickening rhythm, and with every pulse, a wave of searing energy washed over the fortress of Frostfang Keep. The K.E.P. was a masterpiece of brutalist vampire architecture, all sharp angles and thick, black stone, built to withstand a siege of 1,000 years. But it was not built for this. The golden light of the ascendancy didn't just batter the walls. It unmade them. The black stone glowed cherry red, then simply dissolved into dust. The screams of the dying, thin and sharp, finally reached them on the wind. Isolde's face was a mask of cold, controlled fury. She urged her mount into a steep dive, her greatsword already in her hand. Naruto, seeing her go, pushed more chakra to his feet and bounded ahead. Landing on the blood and ash-soaked ground just outside the main gate seconds before the queen and her honor guard. The scene was a vision of hell. The starlight ascendancy moved with the terrifying, silent precision of a hive mind. They weren't a disorderly mob of zealots, they were a disciplined army. Ranks of robed foot soldiers fired coordinated volleys of light arrows, while larger, more heavy, highly armored figures acted as living artillery, channeling the beams of energy that were eroding the fortress. They methodically cleansed the battlefield, incinerating the wounded and the dead alike. For the dawn that is to come, they chanted, their synthesized voices a chilling, unified drone. Naruto. Isolde's voice cut through the chaos as she landed behind him. The source of the main beam is that one, on the ridge. She pointed her sword towards a lone figure, taller than the rest, who stood silhouetted against the pulsating pillar of light. The champion. Break him, and you break their morale. Got it. Naruto slammed his palms together. Smoke exploded around him, and 200 shadow clones burst into existence, a chaotic, screaming orange tide that immediately charged the ascendancy's flank. The disciplined holy warriors, who had been fighting a slow, methodical siege, were suddenly thrown into disarray by the sheer, anarchic madness of the Uzumaki battle plan. While his clones sowed chaos, rescuing beleaguered vampire soldiers and disrupting the ascendancy's formations, the real Naruto and Isolde moved as one. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. They became a whirlwind of death. Isolde was a force of pure, kinetic violence, her massive sword a blur of black steel that shattered the light constructs of the enemy and cleaved through their golden armor. For every enemy that got past her guard, Naruto was there, a phantom of speed and precision, his kunai finding the vulnerable joints in their armor, his Rasengan obliterating their ranks. They were a perfect, devastating unit of ice and fire. They carved a bloody path through the battlefield, fighting their way up the ridge towards the enemy champion. He stood waiting for them, unmoving, a spear of pure, olidified light held loosely in his hand. As they approached, he raised a hand, and his soldiers fell back, forming a wide, silent circle around them. He was the same one from the cenotaph, but here, under the open sky. His power felt 10 times greater. His silver mask was flawless, his golden robes unstained by the battle that raged below. The Shadow Queen and her pet heretic, the champion's synthesized voice was calm. Almost conversational. You have come all this way only to be cleansed. I am Molecule, first sword of the ascendancy. And on this day, your blighted kingdom will begin its end. You talk too much, Isolde snarled. And charged. The duel was unlike anything Naruto had ever experienced. Molecule was preternaturally fast, his spear a flicker of deadly light. But it was his defensive capabilities that were so terrifying. He could create shields of golden energy that absorbed Isolde's powerful blows and sizzled against Naruto's chakra-infused fists. They were forced on the defensive. A two-person army against a single, untouchable foe. Molecule fought with a chilling grace, his every move designed not just to kill, but to purify. Can you not feel it? He said, his voice resonating with absolute conviction as he forced Isolde back a step. The glory of the coming dawn. Malevolentia offers salvation, a release from this cursed half-life. She offers an end to the shadows. It was during a fierce exchange that Naruto saw the opening. Molecule overextended, his spear thrusting for Isolde's heart. Naruto was already moving, a Rasengan forming in his palm, aimed at the zealot's exposed back. But Molecule was a step ahead. It was a feint. He abandoned his attack on Isolde, spinning with impossible speed and launching a massive wave of golden energy, not at Naruto, but at the crumbling wall of the keep's main bastion behind them. The wall exploded. Tons of black stone rained down towards a makeshift aid station where a handful of wounded vampire conscripts huddled in terror. They were young, barely a century old, their faces masks of fear. Isolde didn't even think. Her duty, her entire existence, was defined by one singular purpose: to protect her people. She abandoned her attack, her battle with Molecule, everything. In a blur of motion, she was there, between the falling rock and the terrified soldiers, her arms spread wide, her own body the only shield she could offer. Most of the debris was deflected by her immense strength. But she couldn't stop it all. And Molecule's true attack came in the same instant. A spear of concentrated light, fired from his hand, shot through the dust and chaos and impaled her through the side. It didn't make a sound. It just hit. The light burned through her armor, through her flesh, a holy fire that cauterized as it destroyed. Isolde's eyes went wide, a silent gasp escaping her lips. Her strength failed her, and she collapsed to her knees, the light spear still embedded in her, pulsing with a faint, malevolent glow. The world went silent for Naruto. He saw the fear in the eyes of the young soldiers Isolde had saved. He saw the cold, triumphant tilt of Molecule's masked head. And he saw Isolde, the unbreakable queen of the north. The warrior of ice and iron, brought down into the blood-soaked mud. Something inside him snapped. It wasn't just rage. It was a cold, absolute clarity. A feeling of pure, primal protectiveness that transcended strategy and thought. Kurama's chakra, a boiling, hateful red, surged from the seal, but it didn't just cloak him. He reached out, not to the dead world around him, but to the sun of life force within himself, and he pulled. He forced the calm, balanced energy of sage mode to manifest, dragging it kicking and screaming into the torrent of the fox's demonic power. The two forces met, and for a terrifying second, he thought they would tear him apart from the inside. Then, they merged. His skin didn't just glow, it ignited. Kurama's orange chakra formed a roiling, spectral cloak around him. But within it, a core of brilliant, golden sage energy burned. The whisker marks on his cheeks darkened, becoming stark and jagged. The markings around his eyes were not the calm orange of a perfect sage, but a furious, burning crimson. It was an unstable, volatile, and utterly overwhelming fusion of life and rage. Molecule took an involuntary step back. What is this power? Naruto didn't answer. He didn't look at Molecule. He looked at Isolde, and then he moved. He wasn't fast. He was instantaneous. He appeared before Molecule, his hand closing around His zealot's wrist before the first sword could even register his presence. The golden light of Molecule's power sputtered and died where Naruto touched him, snuffed out by the sheer density of his life force. Naruto squeezed. There was a sickening crunch of bone. Molecule let out a synthesized shriek of pain as his wrist shattered. Naruto drove his other fist into the zealot's chest. The blow didn't just break his armor. It sent him flying backward, tumbling end over end until he crashed into the base of the ridge with enough force to shatter the rock. The ascendancy army, which had been pressing its advantage, stopped dead. They stared as their invincible champion was effortlessly, brutally dismantled. Naruto walked slowly towards the fallen zealot, his very presence warping the air around him. Molecule struggled to rise, his light spear reforming in his unbroken hand. He thrust it forward in a last, desperate attack. Naruto caught the spear of pure light in his bare hand. It sizzled, and steamed against his chakra shroud but could not penetrate it. He tightened his grip, and the spear of light shattered into a million glittering motes. With his other hand, he reached out and ripped the silver mask from Molecule's face. The face beneath was shockingly young, human, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fanaticism. Naruto leaned in close, his voice a low, dangerous growl that was equal parts man and demon. "Get out of her kingdom. And tell your goddess, I'm coming for her." He threw the broken zealot aside like a discarded doll. Molecule, his faith shattered, his body broken, scrambled to his feet and fled. His remaining soldiers breaking rank and following him in a full, panicked retreat. The battle was over. Naruto's overwhelming power receded, leaving him gasping. His body screaming in protest at the strain. He stumbled over to where Isolde lay. Her honor guard was around her, their healers trying desperately to stem the damage, but their blood magic hissed and evaporated against the holy wound. "Get back," Naruto commanded, his voice raw. They hesitated, then saw the look in his eyes and obeyed. He knelt beside her. The wound was horrific, a festering of golden light that was actively eating away at her immortal flesh. She was pale, her breathing shallow. Her glacial eyes, clouded with pain, found his. He placed his hand over the terrible wound, his palm hovering just above her skin. He didn't know medical ninjutsu. He didn't have a plan. He just acted. He reached for that same, volatile power, the fusion of Kurama and the sage, and he pushed it into her. It was not a gentle healing. It was a violent, agonizing act of creation. A torrent of pure, unadulterated life force poured from him into her. Isolde's back arched, a choked scream tearing from her throat. For her, it was the feeling of being plunged into the heart of a star, every cell in her body simultaneously immolated and reforged. For Naruto, it was like siphoning his own soul. The drain so profound it left him dizzy and nauseous. Under his hand, the wound closed. The corrupting holy light was not just expelled, it was annihilated, consumed by the overwhelming tide of his energy. New skin, flawless and unblemished, knitted itself together where moments before there had been a fatal wound. He slumped back, the last of his strength gone, his body trembling with exhaustion. He had won the battle. He had saved the queen. He fell back against a piece of rubble, his head spinning. Isolde pushed herself up, her movements stiff. Her hand went to her side, to the place where the wound had been. There was nothing. Not even a scar. She looked at her hand, then across the blood-soaked ground to Naruto, who was watching her, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The sun was beginning to set on the horizon of the real world, and for a brief, magical moment, a sliver of genuine, crimson sunlight pierced the perpetual twilight of the obsidian realm, bathing the horrific tableau of the battlefield in a soft, red glow. Isolde looked at him, her glacial blue eyes, for the first time, stripped bare of all their royal composure, showing a raw, profound vulnerability. No words were spoken. In the silence of the battlefield, surrounded by the dead and the dying, a new, unbreakable covenant had been sealed. It was a bond forged not of prophecy or politics, but of shared blood, shared fire. And a scar that only the two of them would ever truly see. Chapter 5 End. Chapter 6. A Kingdom Divided. The victory at Frostfang Keep was a poisoned chalice. News of the ascendancy's retreat spread through the obsidian realm. A brief, flickering candle of hope in the oppressive gloom. But the stories that followed in its wake were of the cost. They were tales of soldiers turned to ash by holy fire, of fortress walls unmade by a hateful golden light, and of the Queen of the North herself struck down by an enemy they had, until now, dismissed as scattered fanatics. The candle of hope was quickly snuffed out by a rising wind of fear. Naruto felt it the moment he returned to the Crimson Court. He was hailed as a hero, the savior of the North, but the accolades were brittle, the praise laced with a terror that was almost palpable. The nobles who had once tried to undermine him now bowed, but their eyes were filled with a new kind of calculation. He was no longer just a powerful weapon, he was a terrifying one. Wielding a chaotic, sun-like energy that had saved them today, but might just as easily consume them tomorrow. He spent 2 days in a self-imposed seclusion, recovering from the profound exhaustion that had followed his volatile fusion of powers. His chakra coils felt frayed, scraped raw from channeling such a contradictory torrent of energy. Kurama was sullen and silent within him, nursing its own deep, metaphysical bruises from the clash with the holy light. On the 3rd day, Isolde came to him. She found him not in his opulent chambers, but on a high, windswept parapet. Staring out at the star-dusted cavern roof. She was clad in her armor again, the black steel flawless, showing no sign of the near-fatal wound she had suffered. But something in her had changed. The icy distance in her eyes had been replaced by a watchful, searing intensity whenever she looked at him. "My healers can find no trace of the injury," she said, her voice low as she came to stand beside him. The wind whipped strands of her white hair across her face. "They say it is impossible. That no magic, no alchemy they know of, could do such a thing." "It wasn't magic," Naruto said, not looking at her. "It was just life. I just gave you some of mine." He made it sound simple, like lending a kunai. But they both knew the truth. He had poured a piece of his soul into her. He could still feel the phantom warmth of it under her skin, a tiny, alien sun in her ancient, frozen heart. "It is a debt I can never repay," she stated. It was not an offer of gratitude, it was an mission of a fundamental shift in the balance of their world. "There's no debt," Naruto said, finally turning to meet her gaze. His blue eyes were serious, weary. "We're on the same side. That's all that matters." Her lips thinned. For a moment, she looked as if she wanted to argue, to say more, but she was a warrior, not a courtier. Instead, she gave a sharp nod. "The council has been convened. Your presence is required. The fear is spreading faster than the corruption now. The great houses are demanding answers. They are demanding a plan." The Grand Council chamber was a pit of vipers. The air was thick with paranoia and barely veiled panic. The great obsidian table was surrounded by the lords and ladies of the most powerful vampire houses, their ancient, noble faces etched with a fierce hate tried and failed to conceal beneath masks of aristocratic disdain. At the head of the table sat the 3 queens. Lilith was a silent, unmoving shadow. Seraphina's face was a carefully composed mask of serene authority, though Naruto could see the tension in the set of her jaw. Isolde was a figure of granite, her recent battle giving her a grim, unassailable authority. The debate was already raging when they entered. "A purge is the only answer," a harsh voice declared. It belonged to Lord Verlag, an ancient, battle-scarred vampire whose house had guarded the southern borders for 5 millennia. He was a pragmatist, a creature of logic and brutal efficiency. The enemy is within our walls, in our very blood. We must institute mandatory purity tests for every vampire in the realm. The slightest sign of the corruption, the yellow eyes, the babbling tongue, must be met with immediate and final purification. You speak of executing our own people, Verlag. A younger lord protested. On suspicion alone. Better to sacrifice 1,000 on suspicion than to lose 10,000 to certainty. Verlag slammed his gauntleted fist on the table, the sound echoing like a death knell. We seal the borders. We cut ourselves off from the blighted outer territories. We turn inward and we cut out the rot, piece by bloody piece. It is the only logical course of action. His words, though horrific, found fertile ground. Naruto could see the nods of agreement from several of the older, more conservative lords. Fear was a powerful motivator. And what of the ascendancy? It was Serafina who spoke, her voice a calm, cool counterpoint to Verlag's fire. While we are busy tearing ourselves apart, they will continue to gather their strength. This is precisely what they want, first to become our own executioners. A purge will lead to civil war, and a sealed border is merely a cage we are building for ourselves. Then what is your solution, my queen? Verlag sneered. To send another letter, to offer them a trade agreement. My solution, Serafina said, her amethyst eyes flashing, is to fight a smarter war. We know they are zealots, but every faith has its schisms. We must find those within their ranks who can be turned. We need intelligence, we need to understand their leadership, their resources. We must use diplomacy and espionage to shatter them from within before we risk last legions in an open conflict we know nothing about. Her proposal was met with mutters of discontent. It sounded slow, uncertain. It did not have the brutal appeal of Verlag's final solution. She was then that every eye in the room turned to Isolde. She had been silent, a storm cloud waiting to break. She had faced the enemy. Her word carried the weight of fresh blood. I have seen their holy light, she said, her voice a low, dangerous rumble that silenced the room. I have felt its burn. This is not an enemy you can reason with. It is not a disease you can quarantine. It is a fire, it will consume everything unless we stamp it out with overwhelming force. She rose to her feet, her presence dominating the chamber. I propose a full war footing. We will conscript every able-bodied vampire from every house. We will forge our remaining resources into a single, great army, and we will march on the north. We will hunt down every last one of these ascendancy filth and we will eradicate them. We will meet their fire with a tide of blood and steel. Total war is our only path to survival. The chamber erupted. The warrior clans roared their approval, their bloodlust stirred. The more cautious houses recoiled, imagining their ancestral homes emptied, their bloodlines sent to die in the frozen wastes. The council was fractured, split into 3 warring camps, the purgers, the diplomats, and the warriors. And in the middle of it all stood Naruto. Every head eventually turned to him. The Crimson Sage, the hero of Frostfang Keep, the living weapon. His voice, they knew, could tip the balance. Lord Uzumaki, Serafina said formally, though her eyes pleaded with him. You have faced their champion. What is your counsel? Naruto looked around the room, at the faces filled with fear, rage, and desperation. He understood all of them. Verlag's fear was the fear of an internal, unseen enemy. Serafina's caution was the wisdom of a ruler trying to hold a fragile kingdom together. Isolde's rage was the righteous fury of a warrior who had seen her people slaughtered. They were all right, and they were all wrong. Your plans are all going to get you killed, he said, his voice quiet but carrying a weight that cut through the noise. A stunned silence fell. Lord Verlag, Naruto said, turning to the old pragmatist. You want to start killing your own people because you're scared. The second you do that, you've already lost. You'll be doing the ascendancy's work for them. They won't have to burn your kingdom down, because you'll have torn it apart from the inside. He then turned his gaze to Serafina. Your Majesty, you want to talk to people who think you're a disease that needs to be cured. There's no negotiating with that. While you're sending spies and trying to find cracks in their faith, they'll be building an army big enough to wipe you off the map. Your way is too slow. Finally, he faced Isolde. His gaze softened for a fraction of a second before hardening again. And you want to throw every soldier you have at them. You saw how they fight. They're disciplined, they're coordinated, and they have a weapon that kills your soldiers before they can even get close. A full frontal assault isn't a strategy, it's suicide. You'll just be giving them more bodies to burn. He let the weight of his words settle. He had alienated everyone in the room. So you criticize all, Outworlder. Verlag spat. But you offer nothing. I offer a third option, Naruto said, stepping forward, his presence filling the center of the room. A shinobi's option. You're all thinking like kings and generals, moving armies like pieces on a board. You need to start thinking like assassins. He looked from queen to queen. We don't need a great army, and we don't need a purge. We need a scalpel. We cut the head off the snake. While Lord Verlag is right that the rod is a threat, the solution isn't to kill the sick, it's to find a cure. So we fight a war on two fronts. Front 1, he said, holding up a finger. Lilith, you take the afflicted vampire from the dungeon. You take the data crystal from the sunken city. You and Alaric, you led a team of your best mages and alchemists. And you don't sleep until you find a way to reverse this corruption, or at least a way to inoculate our people against it. He held up a second finger. Front 2, me, I'll lead a small, elite strike team. Not an army, a handful of your best. The fastest, the quietest, the deadliest. We go deep into the northern territories, into the ascendancy's heartland. We don't engage their army. We hunt their leadership. We find Molecule, their first sword, and anyone else in charge, and we take them out. We cripple their command structure. We make them blind and deaf. His plan was met with a stunned, disbelieving silence. It was audacious. It was ridiculously risky. It flew in the face of every tradition of vampiric warfare. It was a plan that relied not on the strength of thousands, but on the skill of a few. It required an insane amount of trust. You would gamble the fate of our entire race on a single, covert mission? Serafina asked, her voice tight with disbelief. Politically, this is untenable. The houses demand action, a show of force. This is a whisper in the dark. It will not quell the panic. Let them panic, Naruto said dismissively. Winning is what will stop the panic. Your way, you're worried about losing the kingdom while you fight the war. My way, we win the war before the kingdom has a chance to fall apart. He turned to Isolde, and it was here his voice became a plea. I know you want to hit them with everything you have. I get it, I feel it too, but I was there. I saw you go down. I will not stand by and watch your soldiers mar. Into that light to die when there's a better way. A smarter way. The raw, personal emotion in his voice silenced whatever protest Isolde had been about to make. Their eyes locked, and in that gaze, the entire council chamber, the entire world, seemed to fade away. It was a direct confrontation, not of strategy, but of will. She saw his plan not as cautious, but as controlled, precise, and deadly. He saw her desire for war not as reckless, but as the desperate, honorable fury of a queen trying to protect her home. Your plan, it places you in the greatest danger, she said, her voice barely a whisper. They will know it is you. They will throw everything they have at stopping you. I'm counting on it, he said with a grim smile. The tension in the room was a physical thing. Naruto had laid his strategy on the table. He had challenged their traditions, their fears, and their pride. Now, he could only wait. It was Lilith who broke the silence. She rose from her throne, a column of shadow and ancient knowledge. His logic is sound, she whispered, her black eyes sweeping across the council. The corruption is a sickness of the soul. It cannot be cured with a sword. The ascendancy is a cult of personality. Without its leaders, it will fracture. The Outworlder's plan is the only one that addresses both threats simultaneously. With Lilith's support, the tide began to turn. Serafina, though still deeply concerned about the political fallout, saw the strategic brilliance, the unconventional thinking that had so impressed her over the Sivas board. Isolde was the last to yield. She looked from Naruto's determined face to the concerned faces of her lords. She wanted vengeance. She wanted to lead a glorious, bloody charge and wash the memory of Frostfang Keep from the mountains in ascendancy blood. But she was a queen before she was a warrior. Her duty was to her people's survival, not to her own rage. Very well, she said, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. We will try it your way. She looked directly at Naruto, her eyes like chips of ice. But if your strike team fails, I will unleash the Northern Army. And I will burn a path to their masters through a mountain of their dead. Do you understand? Quote, perfectly, Naruto replied, his gaze unwavering. The decision was made. A new kind of war had begun. The council adjourned, the lords and ladies leaving in a buzz of anxious, uncertain conversation. Naruto had won the debate, but his victory felt hollow. He had placed himself at odds with the very people he was trying to save. Later, as he was reviewing APS of the Northern Territories with Alaric, Isolde found him alone. The anger had left her, replaced by a cold, grim resolve. You chose the hardest path, Naruto, she said quietly. It's the only one that leads to us winning, he replied. Not looking up from the map. You ask for my trust, after I have just seen my oldest fortress nearly crumble to dust, she pressed, stepping closer. You ask me to send a handful of my best warriors into the heart of the enemy's power, led by an outworlder who has been in our world for less than a season. You ask me to sit and wait while you fight a battle I should be leading. He finally looked up, and she saw the exhaustion and the immense weight he was carrying. I'm not asking you to wait, Isolde. I'm asking you to hold the line. Verlag and his purgers aren't going to just give up. Serafina is going to have to deal with panicked lords threatening to secede. Your job is just as important as mine. You have to keep the kingdom from killing itself while I'm gone. You have to make sure there's something left for us to save. His words struck home. He wasn't sidelining her. He was entrusting her with the defense of the entire realm. He was treating her not just as a warrior, but as the queen she was. The tension between them eased, replaced by the quiet, grim understanding of two commanders preparing for a war on multiple fronts. His leadership had been tested not by a monster or a zealot, but by the conflicting, desperate hearts of his own allies. And in navigating that treacherous landscape, he had proven he was more than just their consort or their champion. He was becoming their leader. Chapter 6 End. Chapter 7. The Heretic's Gambit. The war room was no longer a place of debate, but of quiet, grim preparation. The maps spread across the obsidian table were now marked with Naruto's bold, unorthodox plan. Isolde, true to her word, had granted him his elite team. Her selections were a testament to her ruthless pragmatism. First were the twin oracles, Lyra and Kasian. Handpicked by Lilith, they moved as one, silent shadows in form-fitting black leather, their porcelain masks betraying no emotion. They were the court's finest infiltrators. Blood mages whose art was not in grand, explosive displays, but in the subtle manipulation of shadows and silence. The final member of the team, however, was a deliberate challenge. Isolde had chosen Valerius, the silver-haired champion from the southern court, the rapier-wielding aristocrat whom Naruto had first humiliated in the plaza of Duskfall, stood beside the oracles, his arms crossed. His handsome face a mask of contemptuous indifference. His presence was a political necessity, a gesture to Serafina's faction, proof that this was a unified effort, but Naruto knew it for what it was, a test. Isolde was forcing him to prove he could lead not just those who respected him, but those who despised him. The target is the abandoned monastery of Seratus, Alaric said, his long, skeletal finger tapping a remote peak in the jagged Dragon's Tooth mountain range. An ancient place of contemplative silence, which makes it the perfect location for a clandestine meeting. Our intelligence, gleaned from the ramblings of the corrupted, suggests a high-ranking ascendancy leader will be present to consolidate their forces in the north. The area is saturated with chaotic, residual magic from the Elder Wars. Lilith added, her voice a dry whisper. It will scramble any long-range scrying and make teleportation unpredictable. You will be going in blind, and you will be on your own. Good, Naruto said with a nod. Less chance of them seeing us coming. He looked at his team. The oracles gave a slight, coordinated dip of their masked heads. Valerius simply stared back, his violet eyes cold. We leave at once. Travel light. We hit them fast, we get what we need, and we get out before they know what happened. Valerius let out a soft, almost inaudible scoff. The bludgeon speaks as it knows. Subtlety, I presume, is not in your vocabulary. Naruto met his gaze, his expression unreadable. Subtlety is getting the job done without getting your team killed. Anything else is just showing off. Try to keep up. He turned and walked out, leaving Valerius bristling, his hand instinctively clenching the hilt of his rapier. The journey into the Dragon's Tooth Mountains was a silent, tense affair. The landscape was a nightmare of needle-sharp peaks and bottomless crevasses, a place where the wind howled like a tortured soul. The oracles, Lyra and Casion, moved with a supernatural grace, their feet seeming to find purchase on surfaces no sane person would attempt to climb. Valerius was equally adept, a fluid, elegant phantom against the black rock. Naruto, to Valerius's visible disgust, was far less elegant. He leapt across chasms that should have been impassable, used chakra to cling to sheer ice walls, and sent shadow clones ahead to scout multiple paths at once. His methods were loud, energetic, and, in Valerius's opinion, utterly barbaric. "Must you make so much noise?" Valerius hissed as Naruto's clones returned, dispelling in loud puffs of smoke that echoed in the silence of the pass. The art of infiltration is to become one with the night, not to trample through it like a rampaging behemoth. My trampling. Just confirmed 3 Ascendancy Patrol R. Oats and the location of their primary watch post, Naruto shot back without breaking stride. "How's becoming one with the night working out for you? Learned any good gossip from the rocks?" Before Valerius could retort, Lyra, the female oracle, held up a single, pale hand. The team froze. She pointed towards a high, snowy ridge. Naruto's senses, sharp as they were, had felt nothing. But the oracles didn't just feel chakra or heat. They felt the absence of things, the subtle displacement of silence. Valerius drew his rapier, its silver blade gleaming in the faint moonlight. "A sniper," he whispered. "Worse," Naruto said, his eyes narrowing. He could see it now. A faint, almost imperceptible shimmer against the snow. "A light bender. An ascendancy assassin. I will handle this," Valerius said, his pride stung. He began to melt into the shadows, preparing for a silent, elegant stalk and kill. "No time," Naruto said. He made a single hand sign. 10 shadow clones appeared. They didn't charge. They just stood up, in the open, and started waving their arms, shouting, and throwing rocks in every direction but the correct one. It was a perfect picture of chaotic incompetence. The sniper, its concentration broken by the sheer stupidity of the display, fired. A thin beam of golden light shot out, incinerating one of the clones. It was the only clue they needed. The real Naruto had already moved. While the sniper was focused on the diversion, he had circled around the ridge, a silent blur against the snow. He came up behind the light bender and ended the fight with a single, precise chop to the back of the neck. He returned a minute later, dragging the unconscious and disarmed cultist. Valerius stared, his rapier still in his hand, his perfectly planned, honorable duel preempted by what he could only describe as tactical insanity. "Crude," Valerius said, sheathing his blade. "But effective." It was the closest he could come to a compliment. They reached the monastery of Seratus just before the false dawn. It was a ruin, a collection of crumbling stone towers clinging to the side of the mountain like a fossil. But lights glowed in its windows, and the air hummed with a low, malevolent energy. Guards in the familiar gold and white robes patrolled the broken walls. "The main gate is a bottleneck," Valerius observed, studying the layout. "And the walls are manned. Additional infiltration through the shadows is our best approach. It will take patience." "We don't have time for patience," Naruto countered. He pointed to a high, crumbling bell tower on the far side of the complex. "That's our way in. Lyra, Casion, can you get us up there?" The oracles looked at the sheer, 300-foot cliff face, then at each other, and gave a single nod. "That is a fool's path," Valerius argued. "It is the most exposed point. We would be seen in an instant." "No, we won't," Naruto said, a grin touching his lips. "Because they'll be too busy looking somewhere else." He created a single shadow clone and gave it a simple instruction. A few moments later, on the opposite side of the monastery, a massive explosion of smoke and light erupted, followed by the distinct sound of a dozen stolen ascendancy light grenades detonating at once. The entire patrol force surged towards the diversion, their shouts echoing up the mountain. While their attention was fixed, the oracles went to work. They wove shadows into tangible ropes, anchors of pure darkness that they affixed to the tower. The team ascended in silence, the chaos below providing the perfect cover. By the time the ascendancy soldiers realized the explosion was a diversion, Naruto's team was already inside, hidden in the shadows of the bell tower. Valerius was silent, his earlier arrogance replaced by a grudging, astonished respect. The Outworlders' tactics were crude, loud, and utterly without honor. But they were also brutally, undeniably effective. From their vantage point, they could see into the monastery's central courtyard. It was not a meeting they saw, but a workshop. Dozens of robed figures moved with grim purpose around a large, sinister-looking apparatus. It was a cage of black, rune-etched metal, crackling with contained celestial energy. At its center, a captured vampire, his face a mask of terror, was suspended in a shimmering field. "What in the nine hells is that?" Valerius whispered, his voice tight with horror. A tall figure in ornate, archangel-level robes stepped forward, addressing the assembled cultists. His mask was of pure, unblemished gold, and his voice, amplified by some internal device, was calm and resonant, the voice of a scholar giving a lecture. "Brothers, sisters, for too long, we have merely cleansed the curse. We burn the vessel, but the tainted soul endures in the ether. A stain upon the fabric of reality. But the wisdom of malevolentia has granted us a new tool. A final solution." He gestured to the machine. "Behold, the soul forge. It does not just destroy the body. It uses the creature's own corrupted vitae as fuel, combined with a sliver of Our Lady's divine light, to unmake the very soul. It erases the blight from existence itself." To demonstrate, he threw a lever. The machine roared to life. Golden energy arced from the cage into the vampire prisoner. He didn't scream for long. His body didn't just burn, it dissolved, breaking down into particles of black dust and red light that were then sucked into a large, spear-like crystal at the top of the device. When it was over, there was nothing left. Not a trace. It was as if he had never been. The cultists cheered. Naruto's team stared in frozen horror. This changed everything. This was not a weapon of war, it was a tool of genocide. "We have what we need," Naruto whispered, his voice grim. "It's time to go." But as they began to pull back, the archangel in the courtyard stopped speaking. His golden mask tilted upwards, seeming to stare directly at their hiding place in the bell tower. "It seems," the archangel's amplified voice boomed, "that we have heretics in our midst. How delightful. Seal the monastery." They had been discovered, not by sight or sound, but by a being of immense, perceptive power. "I am Uriel, the voice of the dawn," the archangel announced as alarms began to blare. "And you will not be leaving this place with your souls intact." "So much for the quiet way," Naruto muttered. "Plan B. We make a new door." He didn't wait for an answer. He burst from the bell tower, a Rasengan already in his hand, and blew a massive hole in the courtyard wall. The oracles and Valerius followed, their weapons drawn. The escape was a running, desperate battle through the monastery's corridors. Uriel didn't engage them directly. He was a commander, not a duelist. He sealed corridors with walls of light, teleported squads of soldiers into their path, and collapsed ceilings on top of them. He was turning the entire monastery into a death trap. They were almost out, fighting their way through the main gate, when it happened. Uriel appeared on the wall above them, a newly forged null lance in his hand. It was a spear of shimmering, black and gold crystal, radiating an aura of absolute nothingness. He hurled it not at Naruto, the obvious powerhouse, but at Valerius, the elegant, precise fencer whose style was most vulnerable to a single, overwhelming attack. Valerius saw it coming. He tried to move, to parry, but the weapon's speed was terrifying. He knew he wouldn't make it. He braced for the end. He felt a massive shove, a force like a freight train slamming into his side, throwing him clear. He tumbled across the stone, landing hard. He looked up just in time to see Naruto in the spot where he had been standing. Naruto had managed to twist, avoiding a direct hit, but the null lance's energy field had grazed his side. The pain was something for which there was no frame of reference. It wasn't a burn or a cut. It was a chilling, terrifying sensation of erasure. He felt a piece of himself, a sliver of his very soul, being scraped away into oblivion. Kurama let out a silent, mind-shattering scream of pure agony and violation from within the seal. For the first time in his life, Naruto felt the cold touch of absolute annihilation. He gritted his teeth, a guttural roar of pain and defiance tearing from his throat. He stumbled but did not fall. He glared up at Uriel, his blue eyes blazing with a furious, terrible light. Uriel, for the first time, seemed surprised. Impossible. No being should be able to withstand the touch of the forge. That moment of shock was the opening they needed. The oracles threw a volley of shadow bombs, plunging the gateway into absolute, magical darkness. When the light returned, Naruto and his team were gone, vanished into the blizzard-swept mountains. They ran for hours, a desperate, fighting retreat. Ascendancy patrols, guided by Uriel, harried them through the passes. During one fierce skirmish, a lucky shot from a light bow caught Valerius in the leg, a deep, painful gash. They finally found shelter in a shallow ice cave, the howling wind covering their tracks. Naruto, ignoring the chilling ache in his own soul, immediately went to Valerius, tearing a strip from his own jacket to bind the wound. The proud vampire lord flinched away at first, then watched in stunned silence as Naruto expertly cleaned and dressed the injury. They sat in the tense silence of the cave, the only sound the wind and their own ragged breathing. Finally, Valerius spoke, his voice low, stripped of all its earlier arrogance. You saved me. In the courtyard. Why? I have done nothing but challenge and insult you. Naruto looked up from the bandage, his face lit by the faint glow from a ration bar. His expression was simple, straightforward, utterly devoid of judgment. That's what teammates do, he said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world. We're on the same side. That's all that matters. Valerius stared at him. He had lived for 7 centuries in a world of complex alliances, of honor debts, of favors given and expected. He had never encountered this. A simple, unconditional loyalty. A strength of character that had nothing to do with bloodlines or power, and everything to do with an unshakable inner code. In that moment, the proud, prejudiced Lord Valerius saw not a crude outworlder, but a leader. A king. His violet eyes, for the first time, held a flicker of something beyond grudging respect. It was loyalty. No, Valerius said, his voice quiet but firm. It is not all that matters. He met Naruto's gaze. When we return, you will have my sword. And my house will follow. Not because of a prophecy, or a queen's command. But because of you. A bitter rival had become his most fervent, and perhaps most important, ally. They had survived the heretic's gambit, but they returned with news that would plunge their already fractured kingdom into its deepest, darkest night. Chapter 7 End. Chapter 8. Heart of the Eclipse. The news of the Soul Forge landed on the Crimson Court with the force of a physical blow. It was a revelation so vile, so utterly final, that it extinguished the last embers of political squabbling. The threat was no longer a matter of losing a kingdom, it was a matter of total, absolute extinction, of being erased from the very fabric of reality. The fear that had been a frantic, panicked wind became a deep, crushing pressure, a silence that was heavier than any scream. In this suffocating new quiet, Naruto became the center of a storm of activity. He was no longer just the Crimson Sage or the Outworlder consort, he was the commander of the strike force, the architect of their only desperate hope. His days were a blur of war councils, poring over ancient maps with Alaric, drilling with the oracles, and clashing with Valerius in the training yards, their rivalry now a sharp, demanding tool to hone each other's skills to a razor's edge. He was the rock to which the terrified nobles clung, his unwavering resolve a dam against the tide of their despair. But a dam under constant pressure develops cracks. The wound from the null lance had healed physically, but something of its chilling emptiness lingered. It was a cold spot in his soul, a constant, low-level reminder of annihilation that Kurama's fiery chakra could not warm. He found himself unable to sleep. The quiet hours of the perpetual twilight stretching into an eternity filled with the silent, accusing faces of the vampire soldiers he was about to lead into the heart of the enemy's power. It was during one of these sleepless nights, while he was in the armory, trying to exorcise his demons by beating a training dummy into splinters, that Isolde found him. She moved with a silence that rivaled the oracle's, her presence only announced by the faintest scrape of her armored boots on the stone floor. She was in her full battle regalia, her greatsword resting on her shoulder. "You fight like a man who was trying to kill a ghost," she observed, her voice a low rumble in the cavernous room. Naruto didn't stop. He drove his fist through the dummy's leather chest, sending straw and sand flying. Got a whole graveyard of them to work through. The ghosts of the soldiers you have not yet lost? She asked, her perception as sharp and unforgiving as her blade. He finally stopped, his chest heaving. His knuckles raw. Something like that. A commander who does not feel the weight of the lives he leads is no commander at all, she said. She walked to the center of the training floor. The space where he had defeated her champion, Kalen. She planted the tip of her greatsword into the ground. But brooding will not sharpen your mind. Steel will. She drew a second blade from her back, a long, elegant sword that was still massive by any normal standard, but seemed almost delicate in her grasp. She tossed it to him. He caught it by the hilt, the weight of it familiar and strange at the same time. I have not had a worthy sparring partner in 500 years, she said, falling into a flawless combat stance. Do not disappoint me, Lord Uzumaki. Naruto looked at the sword in his hand, then at the Queen of the North. He saw not a political maneuver or a test, but a simple, direct invitation from one warrior to another. A ghost of a grin touched his lips. Try to keep up, Your Majesty. What followed was not a spar. It was a conversation held in the language of steel. Isolde was a force of nature, her style built on overwhelming power and an unbreakable defense. Her greatsword was a wall of black iron, her movements economical and devastating. She fought like a glacier, implacable and crushing. Naruto, by contrast, fought like a wildfire. He was faster, more agile. His movements unpredictable. He couldn't match her strength, so he didn't try. He flowed around her, a constant, flickering presence, his borrowed blade a blur of feints and probing attacks. He was a dervish of chaotic energy against her stoic immovability. Sparks flew as their blades met, the ringing of steel echoing through the armory. It was a perfect stalemate. Her power was negated by his speed. His speed was contained by her defense. For an hour they moved, a deadly, intricate dance. The strain of command, the fear of the soul forge, the cold spot in his soul, it all melted away, burned off by the pure, exhilarating focus of the fight. He saw an opening, a flicker of an instant where she shifted her weight. He lunged, his blade a silver streak aimed at the gap in her gorget. It was a perfect, killing blow. She was ready for it. Her greatsword moved with impossible speed, not to block, but to trap his blade, using his own momentum to twist it from his grasp. The sword went spinning through the air. In the same fluid motion, she dropped her own weapon and stepped inside his guard, her hand shooting out to grab his wrist while her other hand went for his throat. But he was expecting that, too. He let his wrist be caught, using her pull to spin with her, breaking her hold on his throat and using their combined momentum to throw them both off balance. They shed to the stone floor in a tangle of limbs, a stalemate of a different kind. He ended up on top of her, his forearm pressed against her throat, her hand locked in an iron grip on his wrist. For a moment, they just lay there, breathing heavily, the sweat on their skin gleaming in the forge light. Her armor was cold against his chest, but beneath it, he could feel the fierce, living heat of her. Her glacial blue eyes, usually so distant and controlled, were wide and blazing with adrenaline, pupils dilated. The queen was gone. In her place was the warrior, a creature of pure, unrestrained power and passion. Yield, he gasped, his voice a low growl. A slow, dangerous smile spread across her lips. Never. She bucked her hips, using her formidable strength to reverse their positions, pinning him beneath her. The sheer, unexpected power of the move knocked the breath from his lungs. She leaned down, her face inches from his, the scent of cold iron and something wild and clean, like a winter storm, filling his senses. The long, white strands of her hair fell around his face like a curtain of snow. The spar was over, but the intensity, the raw, electric energy that had crackled between them, remained. It was in the pounding of their hearts, the raggedness of their breath, the way her eyes were locked on his. He didn't know who moved first. It was a mutual, unspoken surrender. Her lips crashed down on his. Not with tenderness, but with the same fierce, uncompromising force she brought to battle. It was a kiss of biting steel and bruising passion, a clash of wills that melted into a shared, desperate need. He wrapped his arms around her, his hands tangling in her snow-white hair, pulling her closer. This was not the affection of a courtier or the submission of a consort. It was the meeting of two equals. Two lonely peaks in a world of valleys, who had finally found a force that could match their own. The cold spot in his soul didn't vanish, but for the first time, it felt a million miles away. Eclipsed by a blazing, brilliant heat. The weight of ruling was a physical thing. Serafina felt it in the constant, dull ache behind her eyes, the tension in her shoulders that never truly eased. Her days were an endless procession of meetings, reports, and political fires that needed to be extinguished before they could consume the realm. The news of the Soul Forge had led her court into a hornet's nest of fear, and she was the only one who could project an aura of calm, unbreakable control. It was exhausting. She had sought out Naruto under the pretense of reviewing the political stability of the allied houses. She found him studying a map of the mortal world, a relic from Alaric's library. "Homesick?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. He looked up, a faint, melancholic smile on his face. "Just remembering what the sun feels like." An idea, reckless and utterly irresponsible, sparked in her mind. It was a whisper of the girl she had been centuries ago. Before the crown had been placed on her head. "I could show you," she said, her voice a conspiratorial whisper. He looked at her, confused. "What? Not the sun?" "Not yet," she clarified, a genuine, mischievous smile gracing her lips, a rare sight that transformed her regal beauty into something far more captivating. "But I can show you your world. Or at least, a world like it." She led him through a series of forgotten, dust-choked corridors in the oldest part of the Crimson Court, to a small, unremarkable chamber that contained nothing but a single, ornate, full-length mirror, its silver frame tarnished with age. "Every great house has one," she explained, tracing a glowing rune on the mirror's frame. "An archway, a relic from before the fall, when travel between the realms was easier. They are notoriously unstable, most have been sealed for millennia. This one, however, is merely forgotten." The surface of the mirror shimmered, the reflection of the room dissolving into a swirling vortex of deep blue and silver light. "It leads to a place your people call Prague. Shall we?" Stepping through the archway was like plunging into an icy river. A moment of shocking cold and disorientation. And then he was standing in a narrow, cobblestone alley, the air thick with the unfamiliar smells of roasting food, vehicle exhaust, and rain on pavement. The sky above was not a bruised purple, but a deep, cloudy indigo, lit by the electric orange glow of a thriving city. It was loud. It was chaotic. It was gloriously, wonderfully alive. Serafina had changed as they passed through the portal. Her regal gown was gone, replaced by a simple, elegant black dress and a long coat. Her raven hair was tied back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger, less burdened. She looked happy. "The rules are simple," she said, her amethyst eyes sparkling with excitement. "For tonight, you are not the Crimson Sage. And she took a deep, theatrical breath of the damp, mortal air, "I'm not Queen Serafina. We are simply, us." What followed was a night of simple, profound joys. They walked through the rain-slicked streets of the old town square, watching the crowds of mortals hurry about their lives, blissfully unaware of the ancient, immortal queen in their midst. He bought her a tridelnik, a hot, cinnamon sugar pastry, and was captivated by the look of pure, unadulterated delight on her face as she took the first bite. It was a pleasure so simple, so mortal, it was utterly alien to her. She, in turn, took him to a smoky, underground jazz club, a place humming with a vibrant, melancholic energy. She taught him how to dance, laughing at his clumsy, shinobi-bred stiffness, her hand light in his. In the dim, intimate lighting, surrounded by the soulful cry of a saxophone, the immense loneliness of her position. A queen who commanded 1,000 lords, but who had no one to simply hold her. They ended the night on the Charles Bridge, the statues of saints like silent, weeping ghosts in the misty rain. The lights of the city glittered on the dark water of the Vieltava River below. "I haven't done this in over 1,000 years, she said quietly, her gaze lost in the city lights. Forgotten what it felt like to be just a person. "You should do it more often," he said, standing beside her, their shoulders almost touching. "A queen cannot afford to be a person, Naruto," she replied. A hint of her usual weariness returning. "A person is vulnerable. A person has wants, fears. A queen is a symbol. A crown. An unbreachable wall." "Sounds lonely," he said simply. She turned to him, the rain plastering a few stray strands of her black hair to her flawless skin. It is. He reached out, his calloused, warrior's hand gently brushing the wet hair from her cheek. It was a gesture of simple, unthinking comfort. She leaned into his touch, her eyes closing for a brief moment, a silent admission of the vulnerability she had just disavowed. He saw it then, the immense strength it took for her to maintain her facade, the sharp, brilliant mind that chafed under the weight of her responsibilities. He saw the woman who had challenged him to a game of wits and found a kindred spirit in his unconventional thinking. The moment was broken by the distant chiming of a clock tower. "It is almost dawn," she said, a genuine sadness in her voice. "We must go back." As the Y stood before the shimmering portal in the alley, she stopped him. "Thank you, Naruto," she said, her voice sincere. "For tonight, for helping me remember." On impulse, she rose on her toes and pressed a soft, warm kiss to his cheek. It was not a kiss of passion like Isolde's, but one of genuine, deep affection. A kiss between friends who were standing on the precipice of something more. "Now," she said, her regal composure returning, though her eyes still sparkled, "let us go and see how we can prevent our world from ending." His search for Lilith ended where it always did, in her vast, silent library. He came to her with the grim knowledge of the Soul Forge, hoping her ancient wisdom could find a flaw, a weakness, in the terrible device. He found her not reading, but staring into a basin of shimmering black liquid. A scrying pool that showed not the future, but the tangled, interwoven threads of past events. The air in the room was cold, the silence heavy. "The soul," Naruto said, his voice quiet as he approached. "What is it, really?" "That machine," Uriel said, "it erases it." "Is that even possible?" Lilith looked up from the pool, her starless black eyes seeming to look right through him. "The soul is a knot," she whispered, her voice like the rustling of dry leaves. "A unique, complex knot tied in the great, cosmic thread of life energy. To be a vampire is to have that knot fixed in place, doused in the shadow of undeath so that it cannot be untied by time." She gestured for him to come closer. "The Soul Forge is a monstrous thing. It does not untie the knot. It takes the thread itself." She made a sharp, tearing motion with her long, pale fingers, and shreds it into nothing. "It is a weapon that attacks causality. It makes it so the knot was never tied at all." The hilling finality of her words hung in the air. "There has to be a way to fight it," Naruto insisted. "Perhaps," she conceded, "if one could introduce a thread so strong, so vibrant with life that its old knot be shredded, but the power required would be immense." Her black eyes focused on him, and he knew she was thinking of his own vast reserves of life force. He saw the weariness in her ancient face, a tiredness that went beyond centuries and into millennia. She had seen empires rise and fall, seen stars born and die. She carried the weight of all that knowledge, all that loss. "You ever get tired of it?" he asked, his question simple and direct. "Watching everything, knowing everything." The question seemed to startle her. It was a personal, human question, the kind no one had dared ask. The Oracle of the Crimson Court in ages. "The curse of my bloodline," she said, her voice distant, "is not the thirst. It is memory. I remember everything, every face, every death. I remember the warmth of the sun on my skin 10,000 years ago, a sensation that is now just data." He sat down across from her, a simple, grounding presence in her world of ethereal knowledge and cosmic echoes. He didn't offer pity or platitudes. He just listened. He told her about his world, about the will of fire, about the idea that a person's true essence lives on in the memories of those they loved and the students they taught. He spoke of Jiraiya, of the third Hokage, of his parents. He spoke of souls not as cosmic knots, but as legacies. Lilith listened, her ancient, tired face unreadable. He was offering her a philosophy so completely alien to her long, lonely existence. A world where immortality was not achieved by cheating death, but by how one lived their life. "You have a very loud soul, Naruto Uzumaki," she said at last. A faint, dry hint of amusement in her voice. "It rings with the echoes of others. It is a chorus, not a single note." In that moment, she was not an ancient oracle and he was not a prophesied warrior. They were two souls, one impossibly old and one impossibly vibrant, finding a strange, quiet resonance in the heart of a dying world. It was a connection not of the body or the heart, but of the spirit itself. It was Alaric who shattered the brief, fragile peace. He burst into Lilith's library, a sight so shocking that Naruto immediately leapt to his feet. The ancient loremaster never hurried. He moved with the slow, deliberate pace of a man for whom centuries were but moments. But now, he was frantic. His face was ashen, his hands trembled, and he clutched at the Ethelberg data crystal as if it were a venomous snake. "My queen, Lord Uzumaki," he stammered, his usual sarcastic demeanor gone, replaced by pure, naked horror. "The crystal, I broke the final encryption." Isolde and Serafina, alerted by the disturbance, arrived moments later, their faces masks of concern. "Alaric, what is it?" Serafina demanded. "What did you find?" "The prophecy," Alaric croaked, his voice cracking. "The Crimson Covenant. It was a lie, a deception. I found the original, unedited text. The full details of the ritual the ascendancy is preparing." He projected the crystal's data into the air. The familiar runes appeared, but now, a new, horrifying section was illuminated. "The ritual to free malevolentia requires 3 things, Alaric explained, his voice trembling. "The breaking of the ancient seals. A celestial alignment that occurs once every 10,000 years. And a sacrifice. A key." He pointed a shaking finger at the final, damning lines of text. "It requires a heart of the eclipsed sun. A vessel containing a paradoxical concentration of pure life force, powerful enough to shatter the very laws of this dimension. A living sun, brought into a world of eternal night." The meaning was sickeningly, terrifyingly clear. Every eye in the room turned to Naruto. "The prophecy," Lilith whispered, her starless eyes wide with dawning horror as she finally understood. "It wasn't a promise of a savior. It was a lure. He was never meant to be a consort," Alaric finished, his voice breaking. "He is the key, his life force, the very power we have been relying on to save us. Is the one thing the enemy needs to sacrifice to unseal their god and begin their final war." Silence. The word fell into the room and shattered the world. The bonds Naruto had just forged, the passionate respect with Isolde, the affectionate camaraderie with Serafina, the quiet spiritual resonance with Lilith, were all instantly recast in a new, horrific light. They had not just welcomed an ally into their hearts. They had brought the enemy's sacrificial lamb into the heart of their fortress. Naruto stood frozen, the warmth of the last few days turning to ice in his veins. The cold spot from the null lance suddenly felt like a vast, consuming void. He was not a player in this game. He was the board. He was the prize. And the final, terrible battle would be fought not for a kingdom, but for his very soul. Chapter 8 End. Chapter 9. The Siege of Duskfall. The revelation did not break them. It forged them. The horror that followed Alaric's discovery was brief, a flash of cold, existential terror that was quickly consumed by a singular, unifying blaze of defiant fury. Naruto was not a sacrifice. He was not a key. He was theirs. The idea that the Starlight Ascendancy thought they could simply take him, use him as fuel for their insane goddess, was an insult so profound it transcended all other concerns. The war councils became sharper, more focused, imbued with a desperate, razor-like intensity. The plan was no longer just to cripple the Ascendancy's leadership, it was to protect Naruto at all costs. But Naruto himself refused to be sidelined. He would not hide in a vault while others fought his battle. He was the tip of the spear, now more than ever. If the enemy wanted him, they would have to come through the heart of the vampire nation to get him. And come they did. Scouts reported the movement first. A river of gold and white, pouring out of the northern mountains. It was not a raiding party or a legion, it was an army. A crusade. Tens of thousands of Ascendancy zealots, armed with weapons of light and driven by a singular, unwavering purpose. At their head marched the Archangels, Uriel and Malakil, their power a malevolent beacon. Their destination was unmistakable, Duskfall. The neutral city, the heart of the Crimson Court, the place where their living sacrifice was waiting. Duskfall, the city of eternal twilight, transformed. The languid, decadent peace was shattered. Ancient, dormant defenses were activated for the first time in millennia. Black, obsidian walls, immune to conventional siegecraft, rose from the chasms surrounding the city, sealing it into a fortress. The spires of the Crimson Court bristled with arcane artillery. The cobblestone plazas became mustering grounds for an army the likes of which the realm had not seen since the Elder Wars. Isolde's Einherjar, a legion of unstoppable northern berserkers, stood shoulder to shoulder with Serafina's Silver Guard, their elegant rapiers a stark contrast to the northerners' brutal axes. Valerius, his house now fiercely loyal to Naruto, marshaled the forces of the lesser houses, his tactical acumen proving invaluable. Even Lord Verlag, his calls for a purge forgotten, now grimly prepared his legions for the defense, his pragmatism now bent towards the singular goal of survival. For the first time in its long, fractured history, the vampire nation was truly united. Naruto stood with the three queens on the highest balcony of the Crimson Court, watching the enemy army fill the horizon. They were a golden tide, washing against the black shores of the city's defenses. They did not bother with siege towers or catapults. Their weapon was their faith. For the dawn that is to come. Ural's amplified voice echoed across the valley, a sound of chilling, absolute certainty. The vessel for the unbinding is within these walls. Surrender him to us, and your end will be mercifully swift. Isolde's answer was a single, curt gesture. 1,000 arcane ballistae on the city walls fired as one. Bolts of solidified shadow and cursed energy, each one potent enough to slay a lesser demon, rained down on the ascendancy's front lines. The golden tide did not break. A wave of shimmering, celestial energy rose from the army, a collective shield that absorbed the volley of dark magic. The bolts hissed and evaporated, harmless. The ascendancy army began its slow, inexorable advance. They're using the combined faith of their soldiers to power that shield, Lilith observed, her black eyes narrowed. It is impenetrable to conventional attacks. Then we won't use conventional attacks, Naruto said. His face was a grim mask of resolve. He had spent the last few days in a state of hyper-focus, the knowledge of his fate not paralyzing him, but sharpening him. He turned to the queens. It's time. The battle began not with a clash of steel, but with a descent into madness. As the ascendancy army reached the base of the city walls, a low, psychic hum vibrated through the very stone of Duskfall. It was the frequency of the corruption, amplified 1,000-fold by the proximity of the ascendancy's power. Within the city, the sickness flared. The older, more powerful vampires, the very ones whose bloodlines made them most vulnerable, began to succumb. A duke in command of the western wall shrieked, his eyes turning a putrid yellow, and turned his ancestral blade on his own men. A squad of elite sentinels on the battlements began to babble in the ancient, forgotten tongue before clawing at each other's throats. It was the enemy's cruelest weapon, Turnin. The defenders' greatest strength, their ancient power, into a fatal weakness. But Naruto had planned for this. He was not on the front lines. He was in the city's Grand Plaza, the place where he had first arrived. Around him stood 100 of his shadow clones, and beside them, Lilith and a coven of her most powerful mages. As the first screams of the corrupted echoed through the city, they acted. Naruto's clones, each infused with a sliver of his sage-enhanced life force, fanned out through the city. They were not a squad of killers, they were a corps of medics. When they found a vampire on the verge of succumbing, they did not strike a killing blow. They performed a targeted, non-lethal chakra strike to the nervous system, a technique Naruto had perfected, rendering the afflicted unconscious before they could cause harm. Lilith's mages then followed, placing them in a magical stasis, containing the threat without culling their own ranks. It was a brutal, desperate triage, but it worked. The internal rot was being managed. With the city stabilized from within, the real battle could begin. On the northern wall, Isolde stood like a goddess of death. The ascendancy had breached the gate, their elite warriors pouring through. Isolde and her Einherjar met them in the breach, a wall of northern fury. Isolde's greatsword was a blur, every swing sending armored zealots flying. She was a whirlwind of righteous, protective rage, her every action screaming a single, clear message: you will not have him. On the southern parapets, Serafina and Valerius conducted a different kind of war. They did not meet the enemy with brute force. They commanded the Silver Guard in a fluid, deadly ballet of precision strikes. Valerius, now fighting with a desperate, focused loyalty, was a silver flicker. his rapier finding the chinks in the enemy's armor, his movements a testament to the deadly art of the duelist. Serafina was the strategist, her commands weaving her soldiers into a perfect, impenetrable web of steel. Exploiting every weakness, countering every enemy gambit before it could even form. But the centerpiece of the battle, the fulcrum on which the fate of the city rested, was Naruto. With the internal threat managed, he moved to the main wall. He stood on the battlements, in full view of the entire ascendancy army, and he unleashed his power. The unstable, volatile Fusio, N of Kurama's rage and the sage's life force erupted from him, a pillar of crimson and gold that dwarfed the enemy's holy light. He was a beacon, a living sun in the heart of the eclipse, deliberately making himself the brightest, most tempting target on the battlefield. "You want me," he roared, his voice amplified by chakra until it boomed across the valley like thunder. "Come and get me." He slammed his hands together. Sage art. Massive Rasen shuriken barrage. 1,000 shadow clones appeared on the walls beside him. Each one formed the devastating, S-rank jutsu. The air screamed as Hausen miniature typhoons of chakra blades were hurled into the ascendancy ranks. The collective faith shield of the enemy army wavered under the sheer, overwhelming power of the assault. It cracked, then shattered. The Rasen shuriken tore through their formations, not just cutting, but shredding on a cellular level. The front lines of the Holy Crusade were simply erased from existence. Uriel, watching from the command post, pointed his golden spear at Naruto. "He is the vessel. He expends his own sacrificial power. Focus all fire on him. Bleed the heretic dry, every ascendancy soldier, every war mage, every piece of arcane artillery turned its attention from the walls, from the gates, from the vampire soldiers, and focused on the single, blazing figure on the battlements. A storm of golden light, 1,000 lances of purifying energy, converged on Naruto. He met the storm head-on. He didn't try to dodge. He became the shield. He held his ground, his chakra cloak flaring, absorbing, deflecting. Enduring a level of punishment that should have disintegrated him 100 times over. Every attack he weathered was an attack that did not hit the city walls or the soldiers beside him. The duel was apocalyptic. The lone, defiant warrior against an army's worth of divine fury. The black stone of the battlements melted into slag around him. The very air crackled and warped with the pressure of the warring energies. He was buying time. Time for Isolde to seal the northern breach. Time for Serafina to outmaneuver the southern legion. Time for Lilith to stabilize the last of the afflicted. But the cost was immense. He could feel his chakra reserves, vast as they were, draining at a terrifying rate. The cold spot from the null lance ached, a weakness in his very soul that the holy light seemed to target. To worry it like a predator testing a wound. He saw Molecule, his wrist now healed, fighting his way towards the wall. The first sword's eyes were fixed on him, burning with a fanatic's hatred and a warrior's need for vengeance. Naruto knew a confrontation was inevitable. He created 2 clones. "Go," he ordered them. "Help Isolde and Serafina. Push them back. Now." The clones nodded and vanished, leaping into the fray below. He was weakening. The crimson and gold cloak began to flicker. A lance of light got through, searing his shoulder. He grunted in pain but did not yield. He was an immovable object, a symbol of defiance for the entire city. Then, he felt it. A new presence, a power so immense, so ancient, that it made Urals feel like a candle flame. The sky above Duskfall, the familiar bruised purple of the cavern roof, began to crack. Not with light, but with a terrifying, profound wrongness. Reality itself was tearing open. Uriel lowered his spear. The entire ascendancy army fell to their knees, their heads bowed in reverence. "The alignment is upon us." Ural's voice was no longer a commander's, but a rapturous priest's. "The seals weaken. She is coming. The dawn drinker awakens." From the tear in the sky, a single, vast, multi-winged eye of pure, liquid starlight looked down upon the world. The pressure of its gaze was a physical weight, Jing warriors on both sides to their knees. The voice that echoed was not sound, but a psychic scream that imprinted itself on every soul in the valley. Less than. Where is the key? Greater than. The ritual had begun, not in a temple, not at an altar, but here. On this battlefield, the sheer volume of death, The raw energy expended by both sides was acting as the catalyst, the final turn of the key in the ancient lock. Malevolentia was beginning to manifest. Naruto felt a terrifying, irresistible pull. His life force, his very soul, was being drawn upwards, siphoned towards the tear in reality. He was the sacrifice, and the altar was calling to him. He drove his feet into the stone, his chakra flaring in a desperate attempt to anchor himself. He fought against the pull, his muscles straining, his teeth gritted. Molecule appeared on the wall before him, his face, now unmasked, alight with ecstatic madness. It is time, heretic. Your purpose is fulfilled. Surrender your soul to the great cleansing. He lunged, his light spear aimed not to kill, but to disrupt Naruto's focus, to break his resistance and allow his soul to be drawn into the maw of the awakening goddess. The siege was a feint. The entire battle had been a lie. Its only purpose was to create the conditions for the ritual and to weaken the sacrifice. They had all been puppets, dancing on the strings of an ancient, cosmic horror. Chapter 9 End. Chapter 10. The Dawn Drinker. The world became a vortex of screaming energy, all of it centered on Naruto. Malevolentia's psychic call was an anchor chain wrapped around his soul, pulling him into the star-filled tear in the sky. The battlefield below, the shouts of his allies, the triumphant cries of the ascendancy, it all faded into a distant, meaningless roar. There was only the pull, A4. of cosmic hunger that threatened to unmake him. Molecule's spear flashed towards him, a final, triumphant strike. Naruto, his will strained to the breaking point just resisting the celestial siphon, couldn't dodge. This was the end. He was the key, and the lock was turning. But he was not alone. A blur of black steel intercepted the spear. Isolde, her face a mask of primal fury, her greatsword glowing with a chilling, dark energy, slammed Molecule's attack aside. She stood before Naruto, a living shield of northern iron. He is not yours to take, she snarled, her voice a low, guttural promise of death. From his other side, a silver flicker. Valerius, his movements a blur of impossible grace, appeared beside her, his rapier at the ready. Behind him, Seraphina stood on the shattered battlements, her hands weaving intricate patterns in the air as she directed the remaining vampire forces, forming a defensive cordon, a wall of bodies between their faltering hope and the ravenous god in the sky. His fate is bound to ours, Valerius declared, his voice ringing with a newfound, unshakable loyalty. They were buying him seconds, a desperate, defiant stand against a god and its prophet. But it wouldn't be enough. The pull was intensifying, his vision blurring. He could feel his own life force, the very essence of his being, beginning to fray at the edges. It was Lilith's voice that cut through the chaos, not in his ears, but directly in his mind. A calm, ancient whisper in the heart of the hurricane. Less than they cannot take what you give willingly, Naruto Uzumaki. Greater than. The words were a spark of insane, impossible clarity. A shinobi's truth. The ultimate misdirection. You don't fight an enemy's strength. You turn it into a weakness. The enemy wanted to take his power. Fine. He would give it to them. All of it. Less than don't fight the current. Greater than his mind raced, the plan forming in a single, terrifying instant. Less than become the tidal wave. Greater than. Kurama. He roared, not aloud, but in the depths of his soul. Are you with me? A deep, rumbling growl answered him, a sound of absolute, feral trust. To the very end, Kit. Get back, Naruto yelled, his voice ragged. All of you, get away from me, now. Isolde and Valerius hesitated, unwilling to leave him. That's an order, he bellowed, his voice filled with a desperate, terrifying authority they could not disobey. They leapt back, joining Seraphina, their faces etched with a horrified understanding. Naruto stopped fighting the pull. He let go. He opened the floodgates of his soul and pushed. He didn't just allow his energy to be siphoned, he actively, violently channeled it upwards. The torrent of crimson and gold chakra that erupted from him was no longer a beacon, it was a weapon. A river of pure, unadulterated life force, a thusa. ND times more potent than Malevolentia's ritual was designed to handle, shot into the tear in reality. He was overloading the ritual, using himself as a massive, metaphysical bomb. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The multi-winged eye in the sky recoiled, letting out a psychic shriek of agony. It had been expecting a stream and had been hit by a tsunami. The tear in reality began to warp and destabilize, spitting arcs of raw, chaotic energy. Uriel, his face turned towards the sky, screamed in horror and disbelief. No, the vessel is tainted. It resists. It is poisoning the unbinding. Naruto poured more of himself into the torrent, the strain causing black fractures to appear on his chakra cloak. He was literally burning his own soul as fuel. He could feel himself fading, his consciousness thinning. The cold spot from the null lance threatening to expand and consume him entirely. He was going to die. But he was going to take their god with him. It was then that he felt them. A hand on each of his shoulders. Isolde and Serafina. He turned his head, his vision swimming. They were standing beside him, their faces grim with resolve. "You are a fool if you think we would let you do this alone," Isolde said. Her voice rough with emotion. "A kingdom is not a crown, or a castle," Serafina added, her amethyst eyes shining with unshed tears. "It is its people, and you are one of us." Before he could protest, they acted. They each drew a silver, runed dagger. Without hesitation, they sliced open their own palms and then pressed their bleeding hands against his back. Vampire blood, the ancient, potent vitae, flowed into him, but it was more than that. Lilith appeared behind them, her hands glowing with an ancient, terrifying power. The oracles and Valerius stood guard around her, a final, desperate line of defense. Lilith was not a combatant. She was a weaver of reality, and she was performing the most dangerous ritual of her long, long life. The Crimson Covenant was a lie. Lilith's voice echoed in all their minds. "So we shall forge a new one. Not of prophecy, but of choice. Not of a consort, but of equals. Blood of the warrior. Blood of the ruler. Blood of the sage." She began to chant in the old tongue, her words weaving the three of them, Isolde, Serafina, and Naruto, into a single, unified circuit of power. Their life forces, their very souls, were being braided together. Naruto felt their strength pour into him. It was not the raw, chaotic power of Kurama, but something different. Isolde's was a deep, unyielding strength, an anchor of cold, hard iron. Serafina's was a sharp, brilliant energy, a current of focused, strategic thought. It didn't just replenish his fading power, it changed it. His crimson and gold chakra cloak stabilized. The black fractures receded. The raw, untamed life force was given shape, tempered by ancient undeath. The heat of the sun was focused by the cold of the eternal night. He was no longer just a human Jinchuriki. He was something new, something more, less than you dare. Greater than Malevolentia's roar of fury shook the foundations of the world. Less than these abominations defile the sacrifice. Greater than. The nascent goddess focused her power, no longer trying to siphon, but to destroy. A beam of pure, concentrated starlight, the very essence of creation, shot down from the tear, aimed at the three figures on the wall. Naruto met the blast. He didn't raise a shield. He raised his hand, and from his palm, a new energy erupted. It was a vortex of spiraling darkness and light, a Rasengan that was both black as the void and brighter than the sun. It was the perfect synthesis of his new nature. A twilight Rasengan. The two forces met. For a heart-stopping moment, there was only silence and a blinding, impossible light. Then, the beam of pure creation shattered. Naruto's attack, a paradox of life and undeath, creation and destruction, tore through it and slammed into the eye in the sky. Malevolentia did not just scream. The very concept of her being was torn apart by the contradictory forces. Her purity was violated by a power that embraced both light and shadow. Her existence, predicated on a singular, divine truth, could not withstand an attack that was, itself, a perfect, harmonious lie. The eye imploded. The tear in reality sealed itself with a deafening thunderclap, leaving behind only the normal, bruised purple sky of the obsidian realm. Silence descended upon the battlefield. The ascendancy army stared at the empty sky, their god gone, their faith shattered. Uriel, his body crackling with uncontrolled celestial energy, let out a single broken sob of despair. On the wall, Naruto collapsed to one knee, the immense power receding, leaving him not empty, but whole. The cold spot in his soul was gone, filled by the warmth of the bonds he had just forged. Isolde and Serafina stood beside him, their hands still on his shoulders, their faces pale but triumphant. They had faced a god and defied it. The war was not over. But the enemy's heart had been torn out. Malakil, seeing his goddess vanquished, let out a roar of pure, nihilistic rage and charged the trio, his spear raised for one final, suicidal attack. He never made it. A black blade, moving faster than the eye could see, pierced his chest from behind. It was Lilith. She had left her ritual circle, her ancient, weary face now set with a grim, final purpose. The age of gods and prophecies is over, she whispered, twisting the blade. The last of the ascendancy's champions fell, his body dissolving into motes of fading light. In the aftermath, the sun began to rise on the mortal world. For the first time in 10,000 years, a sliver of genuine, golden sunlight pierced the magical veil that shrouded Duskfall. It was a weak, hesitant light, but it was there. It fell upon the victors. It did not burn them. The bond they had forged, the new Crimson Covenant, had changed them all. The vampire Vitae, now infused with Naruto's pure life force, was no longer cursed. The sunlight was no longer a poison, but a gentle, forgotten warmth on their pale skin. Naruto stood up, supported by his queens. He was no longer a prisoner of fate, a consort of prophecy. He was a king who had forged his own crown. He looked out at the silent, defeated army, at the dawning light, at the faces of his new, strange, and unbreakable family. His journey was far from over. A world needed to be rebuilt. A people needed to find a new way forward, into the light. But he would not face it alone. He was the Crimson Sage, the bridge between two worlds, forever bound by love, sacrifice, and a shared power that had stared into the abyss and made the abyss blink first. He was home. Chapter 10 End.